Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Hong Kong Horror. I'm your narrator, Simon. Did any of you ever pull pranks when you were kids? I know I did. When I was in the second grade, my neighbors and I would ride our bikes around the neighborhood playing Ding Dong Ditch. We dared each other to ring random doorbells and then pedal away as fast as we could before anyone came out. It was all laughs, that rush of adrenaline, the fear of being caught, until we actually did get caught. The homeowner burst out the door, yelling at us to go home. There are a lot of harmless pranks that kids still pull, even today. But sometimes, you really have to be careful, because some pranks, if you cross the line, can change everything. Tonight's story is a well-known one across Asia. It's been told in a few different versions over the years, but the message is always the same: a prank that went horribly wrong. And after the story, as always, we'll break it down together. I'll show what I personally think happened from a Chinese cultural perspective. So turn on the lights, get comfy, and let's dive right into this one. Also, one more note. As a reminder, this is my only YouTube channel. So if you hear my voice being used on any other channel, it's not me. Someone probably cloned my voice with AI. I only narrate on this YouTube channel. And occasionally, I do collaborations with other YouTubers. This next story was shared by a man in Hong Kong. Let's call him Agi. This happened many years ago, back when cell phones were still brand new, and only a few people actually had one. Most folks still relied on landlines, or the old public payphones you would see on the street corners. Back then, Agi was just your typical high school kid, definitely not the studious type. His grades were terrible, always near the bottom of the class, cared more about hanging out with friends and playing soccer after school. But more than anything, Agi was a prankster. He and his friends loved causing harmless trouble, playing Ding Dong Ditch after school, ringing random doorbells in old apartment buildings, and sprinting away before anyone caught them. In class, he balanced chalkboard erasers above the doors so that anyone that walked in would get showered in a puff of white dust. And of course, there were prank calls. Before the age of smartphones, prank calls were every teenager's favorite pastime, especially back then, when caller ID wasn't really a thing yet. Agi lived in a public housing estate with his parents. Aside from watching TV, there wasn't really much else to do indoors, so he spent most of his time outside, either wandering around town with his friends or playing soccer. It was always more fun than staying inside that cramped little flat. Not too far from his building, there was a single phone booth. One night, after a long game of soccer, Agi was walking home, sipping an energy drink he picked up from 7-Eleven. On a whim, he decided to step into that phone booth to make one of his infamous prank calls. He had a pocket full of loose change and figured, why not? He did this pretty often. Prank calls were his thing. He loved them. He never knew what kind of reaction he would get. Sometimes people were just confused. Sometimes they got really angry. And other times they would get scared. As he slipped a coin into the slot, he wondered, what kind of reaction will he get tonight? Tonight, Agi decided he wanted a confused reaction. He dialed a random number off the top of his head. The line rang a few times before a man picked up. "Why?" the man said. Agi breathed heavily into the receiver, but said nothing. "Why? Bimwaya? Who's this?" the man repeated, sounding annoyed. That's when Agi spoke. "I'm downstairs. Can you come open the door for me?" The man went silent for a few seconds. You could almost hear the gears turning in his head, trying to figure out who was calling him so late. "Who is this?" he demanded. "Just come down and open the door already. I've been waiting forever," Agi said. Then click. Agi hung up, grinning to himself. He could already picture this man standing in his living room, confused and irritated, wondering who on earth might be waiting outside for him. Feeling proud of himself, Agi was about to step out of the booth when he noticed something. A small folded slip of paper sticking out from a narrow slot behind the phone. It looked like it had been there for a while. On it was a phone number, with a few little hearts doodled beside it. He still had some spare change left. Why not, he thought. One more prank call for tonight. Holding the paper in one hand, he dialed the number with the other. The line rang a few times. Then a young woman's voice answered. She was soft-spoken, almost whispering. Her voice sounded distant, like she was calling from another room or somewhere really far away. Agit decided to turn up the creepy factor. "Hey beautiful," he said playfully. "I'm downstairs. Hurry up and come let me in." There was silence. Then, after a few seconds, the woman replied, very faintly, "Okay." And then, the line went dead. Agit was stunned. No reaction at all? Unsatisfied, he slipped another coin into the phone and dialed the same number again. As the line started to ring, time seemed to slow down, each ring echoing longer than it should have. It felt like it was ringing forever, before, click, the same soft voice answered. "Hello?" Agit deepened his tone, trying to sound older. "Hey gorgeous, I said I'm outside. I thought you were coming down to let me in." Then, there was silence again. Then the woman let out a quiet, breathy laugh and hung up. That ticked him off. He pulled out his best prank caller voice, and all he got was a laugh. Without a word, he slammed another coin into the slot and dialed again. The phone rang over and over. Finally, click. The same faint, distinct voice. "Hello?" Normally when a call connects, you can hear something. Faint breathing, background noise, the hum of a TV somewhere. But this time, all that Agit could hear was a sort of static. Then, after a few seconds, even that faded, replaced by a strange, unnatural silence, like the world on the other end of the line had gone completely still. Before Agit could say anything, the woman spoke first. "I'll come find you." The strange thing was, his right ear was pressed against the receiver, but her voice came from his left ear. Then, click. The line went dead. "What the?" he muttered under his breath. Feeling a little unsettled now, Agit decided to call it a night. He folded a little slip of paper and tucked it into his pocket, already planning to prank call that same girl again another day. As he strolled home sipping his energy drink and humming an old Cantonese pop tune, something made him turn around. The phone booth he just stepped out of was maybe 20 seconds behind him, and there, standing just outside the booth, was a girl in a white dress, peering through the glass like she was looking for someone inside. She didn't move, she just stood there, staring in. Agit froze for a second. His mind flicked back to that call. No way, he thought. It can't be her. It was probably just someone waiting to use the phone. After staring for a few more seconds, Agit turned back around and continued walking home. Honestly, he forgot about the whole thing for a few days. But a couple of nights later, again, after one of his late-night soccer games, he reached into his pocket and felt something familiar. That slip of paper, the one with the phone number and the little hearts drawn beside it. He smirked. Perfect night to prank her again, he thought. When he reached the phone booth near his apartment, he stepped inside, dropped a coin into the slot, and dialed the number again. The phone rang a few times, but no one picked up. Agit figured she wasn't home, or maybe she was too scared to answer this time. He chuckled proudly at himself, thinking that maybe he really had gotten to her last time. He hung up and was about to leave, when the public phone rang. The sudden sound made him freeze. Booth was empty. The street around him was quiet. Slowly, he picked up the receiver. "Hello?" he said. There was a harsh, distorted static on the other end. Then, a click, as if someone had just hung up. But before Agit could lower the receiver, he heard it. A voice, loud, sharp, and close. Not through the phone, but inside his head.
"Found you."
Followed by laughter. Startled, Agit dropped the receiver, heart pounding. He could feel it, that cold, prickling sense that someone was right behind him. Slowly, he turned around. Pressed up against the glass of the phone booth was a woman, the same woman in the white dress he saw a few nights ago. Her face was inches from his, smiling. But the smile was too wide, too stretched, too wrong. She stared straight at him through the glass, her grin twisting even wider as a sound began bubbling out of her throat. A laugh. Agit stumbled backwards and fell to the ground. Terrified, he scrambled out of the phone booth, crawling at first, then running for his life. He didn't dare look back. What if she's chasing me, he thought. His legs burned as he sprinted toward home, his mind repeating over and over, "This isn't real. This can't be real. I'm dreaming. I have to be dreaming." The whole incident shook him so badly that he swore off prank calls altogether. But it wasn't over. It was only the beginning of a string of strange events that would haunt him for months. One night, after another late-night soccer game, Agit was walking home as usual. When he reached the familiar street corner, he saw the phone booth again. His chest tightened. Memories of that night flashed through his head. Her face against that glass, that awful grin. He forced himself to look away and quickened his pace. That's when he heard it. Footsteps. Short, deliberate, following right behind him. He spun around quickly, but the street was empty. No one was there. He turned back and kept walking, trying to calm down. But the footsteps started again, matching his pace exactly. When he stopped, they stopped. When he walked, they followed. Now, terrified, Agit broke into a brisk walk, then a jog. And the phantom steps quickened with his, growing louder, closer. Finally, he couldn't take it anymore. He ran, sprinting down the street, heart pounding. He darted across the road toward his apartment building, not noticing a car turning the corner. Tires screeched. The driver slammed on the brakes just in time as Agit stumbled backwards and fell hard onto the street. The driver jumped out, furious. "Are you crazy? Playing tag with your girlfriend this late at night? You're gonna get yourself killed." The driver threw out a few Cantonese curses at Agit before getting back into his car and speeding off. Agit sat there, trembling. His knees were scraped, but otherwise he was fine. What wasn't fine was what the driver had said. Playing tag with your girlfriend? Agit slowly turned his head. There was no one there. He had been walking home completely alone. Things only got stranger as the days went by. Agit began seeing things that weren't really there. When he showered, sometimes he caught a faint outline of a figure standing just outside the curtain. But every time he pulled it back, no one. In his living room, the little nightlight that turned on with motion began flickering randomly throughout the night, even when the air was still and no one was near it. And then came the nightmares. Night after night, Agit dreamed of that phone booth, the same scene replaying again and again. The woman in the white dress, her face pressed against the glass, whispering the same words each time. "Give it back. It doesn't belong to you." Agit had no idea what she meant, but every time he woke up drenched in sweat, heart racing. His health began to decline. He caught colds constantly, and his body ached all the time. When he played soccer, he would trip, twist his ankle, get injured in ways he'd never used to. It felt like everything in his life was starting to fall apart. One night, after school, he rode his bike to a nearby herbal tea shop, one of those old school top places, to pick up some medicine for his parents. The shop owner, an older auntie, known for chatting with all her customers, smiled as she handed him the herbs. "Such a good son," she said, "coming all this way to buy medicine for your parents." As Agit paid and turned to leave, she called out again. "Hey young man, take some of these cookies. A friend gave me too many. You can share them with your girlfriend on your way home." Agit froze. "Girlfriend?" he repeated. "Yes, that girl you came with. She was sitting on the back of your bicycle when you arrived," the auntie said cheerfully, wrapping the cookies and tucking them into his bag of herbs. "Don't be shy, share them together." Agit's mouth went dry. He didn't even try to explain. He just nodded weakly, thanked her, and walked out. He couldn't bring himself to ride the bike home. He simply hung the bag of herbs and cookies on the handlebars and walked the bike home the whole way back, trembling the entire time. That was the last straw. Agit didn't know what was happening to him, but he knew, without a doubt, something was very wrong. That night, as Agit tossed and turned in bed, he couldn't stop thinking about that recurring nightmare. Give it back. It doesn't belong to you. What does she mean? Give what back? He's never stolen from anyone before. And then it hit him. The slip of paper. The one he found in the phone booth. That was the only thing he's ever picked up that wasn't his. It was already close to 11 o'clock, and he couldn't wait until morning. Quietly, he snuck out of his apartment, the folded piece of paper clutched tightly in his hand. When he reached the phone booth, he froze. There was already someone inside. At first, he thought the man was just making a call. But as Agit got closer, he realized this man was frantically searching around the phone, checking every crevice and corner. "Excuse me, sir," Agit said softly. "Are you looking for this?" The man, maybe in his late 30s, looked up. The moment he saw the slip of paper, his eyes widened, filled with relief. Yes, thank you, young man. Thank you so much." He reached out and took the paper gently, as if it was something precious. "I'm sorry," Agit said. "I didn't know it was important. May I ask why?" The man stared down at the faded note, a faint smile forming on his lips. "It's alright," he said quietly. "You wouldn't have known. It's not the number that matters. I know it by heart." He paused. "This belonged to my late fiancée. When we first met, our families didn't approve of us. She wrote her number down on this paper, and I hid it here, at this very booth, where I would sneak out at night to call her. She passed away not long ago. I came back to find it, to keep it close, as a memory." Agit stood there, speechless. In that moment, everything made sense. The voice on the phone, the footsteps, the woman in white. It was her, searching for that piece of herself that had been left behind. The man thanked him again and walked off into the night, clutching the paper close to his chest. Agit remained standing by the booth for a long time, the quiet hum of the streetlights surrounding him. From that night on, the nightmares stopped. The motion light in his living room stayed still. The strange sickness faded away. And Agit never, ever made a prank call again. So, Hong Kong horror fans, what do you think happened here to Agit? Please pause the video here and let me know what you think in the comments below. Alright, so what do I think happened here in this incident? Let's break it down together from a Chinese cultural point of view. In Chinese belief, objects carry spiritual resonance, what we call linghei, something deeply tied to emotion, like that slip of paper with the lover's handwriting, can retain part of the person's energy even after death, especially if the person passed away suddenly or with unfinished longing. The energy doesn't fully cross over. When Agit picked up that slip of paper, he wasn't just taking a note. He had unknowingly taken possession of a spiritual link between two souls, the man and his late fiancée. To her spirit, it felt like someone had stolen a piece of her connection to the mortal world. That's why she kept saying, "Give it back." The misfortunes that followed, Agit's health declining, the accidents, the constant nightmares, all fall under what elders would call soiwon, a run of bad luck brought on by disturbing the dead. It's believed that when a living person interferes with something belonging to the spirit world, their yang energy weakens, letting yin entities draw near. But notice, once you return the paper to its rightful owner, everything stopped. In Cantonese culture, that's known as wan mat wan wan, returning the object, returning the soul. When balance is restored, the spirit can finally rest, and the living person's luck returns. So in the end, Agit wasn't cursed for being cruel. He was punished for being careless. A prank that seemed harmless crossed the boundary between the living and the dead. And that's something our ancestors always warned us about. 玩得太過火會惹靈上身. When you play too far, the spirits might start playing back. In Chinese culture, the act of calling someone carries a symbolic weight. The phone itself is seen as a kind of channel, a line that connects two spaces. When you speak through it, your voice and intent travel through invisible currents, what older generations might call yin pathways. That's why we sometimes say, don't answer strange calls at midnight. The belief is that certain hours, especially between 11 p.m. and 3 a.m., are when yin energy is strongest. When Agit dialed that number, he wasn't just dialing the phone. He was unknowingly reactivating a spiritual link that belonged to someone else. That slip of paper he found in the booth wasn't an ordinary scrap. It was a token of attachment, an emotional anchor left by the woman and her fiancé. In life, that number represented their connection. In death, it became a bridge that still tied her spirit to this world. The moment he dialed it, it could be very possible that his voice became the first living one to call her again. To her restless spirit, that sound was a summons. Think of it as lighting an incense in the wrong place. You might not mean harm, but you still invited something that remembers the scent. By calling her number, he opened the door for her to find him. And when she said, "I'll come find you," it wasn't metaphorical, it was literal. The prank call also mirrors a core Chinese superstition. Don't mock the unseen. When you speak playfully about spirits or pretend to interact with them, boundary between jest and invitation blurs. The spirit world doesn't always understand humor. It responds to intent and sound. So to the woman's lingering soul, Agit's flirtatious, "I'm downstairs, come open the door," could have sounded like the voice of her lover calling her once more. That's why she appeared. She wasn't vengeful at first, she was simply answering. And when she realized the voice wasn't her fiancé, but a stranger playing a prank, her sorrow turned into rage and confusion. That's when her spirit began to cling to him, following him home, echoing in his dreams, demanding what was taken. This is what we call 接星层面, seeking someone through a borrowed voice. It's when a ghost uses the voice or vibration of a living person to locate a connection it's lost. So the moment that Agit made that first prank call became the signal. He unknowingly carried her presence with him until he finally returned what was hers. Once he restored that slip of paper, the final physical link to her memory, the balance was restored. The spirit no longer had to search. And that's why all the hauntings stopped. So the next time you pass by a ringing payphone late at night, maybe just keep walking. You never know who might be on the other line, still waiting for a call that was never meant for you. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Hong Kong Horror. I'm your narrator, Simon. And since we're only a few days away from Halloween, I just wanted to start off by wishing all of you a very happy Halloween. Tonight, I've got something special lined up. In the spirit of Halloween, I'll be teaming up with an amazing horror narrator you might already know, Jay Nightmares. If you haven't checked out Jay's channel before, I've linked it down below. Definitely give him a listen after this, as he does a great job at narrating horror stories, mainly from Japan. For this special episode, Jay and I will be tag teaming to bring you a few terrifying stories to set the mood for Halloween night. So, turn down the lights, settle in, and let's dive right into it. I'll start off the episode with a story from Hong Kong. Then, I'll turn it over to Jay. Before we begin tonight's first story, I just want to give a heads up. This one leans on the darker side. Some parts may be disturbing for certain listeners, so please, viewers' discretion is advised. What place comes to mind when you hear the word curse or black magic? For many in Hong Kong, the answer points south to Southeast Asia, where gong tao or curses are said to be ancient, deeply rooted, and terrifyingly effective. More specifically, Thailand. Now, Thailand isn't the only place in the region associated with sorcery, but it carries one of the strongest reputations. In Southeast Asian folklore, Thailand is often known for its mastery of highly specific dark arts, from love curses and revenge spells to ghost raising, yuan guai zai, and binding charms that tie one soul to another. These practices sit somewhere between religion, superstition, and something much darker, a line that few dare to cross. If performed correctly, it's said that these rituals can bend fate itself. Hearing about the supposed benefits might sound tempting, but I'll say this, never, ever get involved with black magic, because everything comes with a price, whether you know it or not. And the story you're about to hear will show you just how high that price can be. This following story takes place in Hong Kong, though its roots trace back to Thailand. It's a story that's been passed around online for years, with a few different versions floating around out there. So some of you may be familiar with the story, but I think it will be new for most of you. The version I'll share with you tonight was shared by a man, Let's call him Alex. At the time, Alex was in his late 20s, just an ordinary guy dating his longtime girlfriend, Linda, for about 5 years. The two were young, broke, but deeply in love. Life wasn't perfect, but it wasn't terrible either. Alex worked a lot of odd jobs while trying to find something more stable, while Linda worked as a front desk receptionist at a small office. The pay wasn't great, but it was enough to keep them afloat. They lived simply, like so many young couples just trying to get by. Money was tight, but they never let that come between them. They were so deeply in love that none of it really seemed to matter. On weekends, they would find little ways to enjoy themselves. Picnics at the park, late-night walks through the city, or just window shopping downtown. They didn't have much, but they had each other. And for them, that was enough. One day, Linda started feeling really tired. Not just work tired, but actually physically drained. And from that moment on, everything started to change for the worse. So, she decided to go in for a routine checkup. Just something to rule out the stress or low iron, she thought. A week later, the results came back. That call from the clinic changed everything. Linda had leukemia. For a moment, the world went completely still. The room, the air, the sound of traffic outside. All of it faded away. It didn't feel real. She and Alex were devastated. The night they got the news, they held each other and cried for hours. The kind of crying that leaves you empty, where there aren't even words left. But when the tears finally stopped, they made a quiet promise to fight it together. Doctors suggested a bone marrow transplant. They tried every possible lead, every name that came up, but none of the matches worked out. In the end, there was nothing they could do but keep trying and hope that she would hold on long enough for a miracle. With no other options left, Linda began chemotherapy. The days blurred together, hospital visits, medication, the smell of antiseptic that clung to everything. Alex stayed by her side through it all. He gave up most of the side jobs he used to take, only keeping a few freelance projects he could do from home. That way, he could be there for her. He went with her to every appointment and stayed by her side every long night. Months passed. The treatment barely made a difference. Linda grew weaker. Her skin turned pale. Her movements slower. Even walking across the room became a struggle. Desperate for anything that might help, they turned to traditional Chinese medicine. Friends told them about a well-known physician, someone that people whispered about, the kind that can supposedly cure the incurable. They decided that they had nothing to lose and to give it a try. And surprisingly, it seemed to work. The blood reports started showing small improvements. Linda's color came back. She smiled more. Her voice had strength again. For the first time in months, Alex allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, things were finally turning around. But after a few more months, something strange began to happen. Linda's stomach started to swell. Slowly at first, like a little bloating after a meal. They brushed it off as indigestion, nothing serious. But the swelling didn't stop. It grew and grew, until she looked several months pregnant. At the hospital, the doctor said that it was an enlarged spleen, a common complication of leukemia, they explained. Nothing unexpected. Alex tried to believe them. He tried to convince himself it was just part of the illness. But deep down, something about it didn't feel right. And soon after that, the nightmares began. At night, Linda began to dream of a boy. His face was distorted, flat like a paper cutout. His body, just a shadow that moved without weight. He never spoke, he just watched. And every time he appeared, she found herself trapped in a cycle of endless labor. Plowing soil under a gray sky, hauling baskets of fruit that never emptied, shoveling dirt into pits that never filled. When she woke up, her whole body ached. Her hands trembled as if she had really been working for days. The exhaustion went deeper than her bones. It hollowed her out. Alex told himself it was stress, a side effect of the illness. But as the dreams grew more vivid, he started to wonder. Through a friend's referral, he found a local medium, someone known for her uncanny accuracy. He brought Linda with him to see her one afternoon, and what the woman said next left them both speechless. "There's a spirit of a little boy in your home," the medium said softly. "He's the child your mother never gave birth to. He would have been your older brother." Linda froze. She had no idea what this woman was talking about. Her mother had never mentioned anything like this. That night, she called home. At first, her mother denied it, but as the silence stretched, her voice began to shake. Finally, she admitted the truth. Years ago, before Linda and her sister were born, she had been pregnant once before, but the baby hadn't made it. Linda's mother explained that at the time, she and Linda's father weren't ready to raise a child yet. They were struggling financially, and the decision was made to end the pregnancy. That night, Alex couldn't shake a thought from his mind. Could the boy in Linda's nightmare actually be that child? The spirit of her mother's unborn son? Now a spirit twisted and trying to reach her from somewhere else? Through a friend, Alex was introduced to a Thai master living in Hong Kong, Master Gap. Master Gap was known for his involvement in an ancient practice known as Yang Guai Cai, raising ghosts. If you've listened to some of my previous stories, you might remember this is a dark art where a practitioner binds and controls the spirits of the dead, often children, fetuses, or restless souls, and keeps them as servants. Some use them for protection or wealth, others for spying, or worse. In Master Gap's case, he used them as scouts, spiritual messengers that could see what ordinary people couldn't. After listening carefully to Alex and Linda's situation, Master Gap performed a short ritual. His voice stayed calm, but his expression darkened. Through the visions of his spirits, he confirmed there really was a little boy in their home, most likely Linda's aborted brother. But the boy wasn't the one harming her. He wasn't angry or vengeful. He was simply there, confused, and caught in something far beyond his understanding. The real danger, Master Gap said, was something else. Something hiding behind the boy's presence, using him as cover. Whatever was behind it didn't want to be seen. Master Gap couldn't yet identify who or what it was, but he promised to help. He prepared the talisman for Linda, drawn with red ink and strange markings, and instructed them to place it beside her pillow that night. "Leave it there," he told them. "Let it work while you sleep. Come back in a few days." That night, Alex and Linda followed his instructions exactly. They placed the talisman on the nightstand by her bed, and when they turned off the light, the room felt completely silent. That night, for the first time in weeks, Linda slept peacefully. The boy didn't appear. The nightmares, the endless fields, the shovels, the pain were gone. But something new took its place. In her dreams, a woman appeared instead. She didn't force Linda to work. She didn't speak at first. She simply walked beside Linda, through quiet places Linda had never seen before. Endless fields, a riverside under moonlight, grassy hills stretching toward the horizon. They sat together, side by side, watching the fields sway in the wind. The air felt calm, almost gentle. The woman looked to be in her 40s, her hair pinned back neatly, her clothes simple, almost old-fashioned. In the dream, Linda remembered asking her who she was. The woman didn't turn to look at her. She just answered quietly, "Miss Chen." There was a long pause. The sound of the wind seemed to grow louder. Then, without moving, the woman spoke again. "This was not meant for you. I know you are innocent, and I'm sorry for what's happened. You are innocent, just like my daughter was. I'm only here to collect my debt." And with that, the dream ended. Linda woke up suddenly, her heart racing. The next morning, she and Alex went back to see Master Gap. With the talisman now in place, Master Gap's spirit children, his Guai Zai, were able to see more clearly, and the truth began to surface. Back in the 1960s, there had been a family, the Chens. They were wealthy traders in mainland China. One night, Linda's father and several of his friends kidnapped Mr. Chen, forcing him to smuggle them across the border into Hong Kong. Afraid of being caught and punished for it, Mr. Chen fled with his wife and young daughter. But the journey didn't end well. Mr. Chen died while they were on the run. Not long after, their daughter also passed away. Finally, Miss Chen, shattered by grief, took her own life. For decades, her spirit wandered, consumed by rage. Unable to find peace, she searched for the man who had destroyed her family. And when she couldn't find him, she found his daughter instead. But that wasn't the worst part. What Master Gop revealed next turned Alex's stomach. He said that Linda's own father had used Gong Tao against her. Gong Tao is pretty much Cantonese for a curse. To protect himself from Miss Chen's vengeance, he had turned his own daughter into a shield, binding her life essence as the vessel of his curse. Master Gop explained that this wasn't ordinary sorcery. Whoever had helped him was a master, someone who knew how to split a curse up into two halves, one bound the victim, and the other sealed inside a physical object. That object, a talisman forged decades ago, was the key. As long as that talisman remained intact, the curse could never fully be broken. And Linda's father was probably the only person who knew where it was hidden. The proof came a few days later. Hidden at the top of their wardrobe, inside a small white envelope, Alex found the unthinkable. Inside were strands of Linda's hair, clippings of her nails, her birth details written out on yellowed paper, and an old earring she had once lost years ago. These were the ingredients of black magic, the personal essence needed to bind a curse. They realized then that everything, the illness, the swelling, the dreams, it was all connected. And the person who had done it was her own father. The physical talisman that anchored the curse was still missing, most likely hidden somewhere he thought no one would ever find it. Without it, the curse couldn't be undone. From that point on, everything began to spiral. Strange things started happening in their room. Random insects appeared even though no food was left out. Every single night, in the exact same spot on the floor, they would find another dead cockroach, as if someone had placed it there. Once, Alex even saw one crawl in alive. It staggered, slowed, and died the moment it reached that spot. When they confronted Linda's father, he denied everything, growing furious that they'd accused him of such a thing. His anger seemed more defensive than shock. But as Linda's body grew weaker, her father's luck only seemed to rise. He started winning lotteries, not once or twice, but again and again. Almost every ticket he bought hit some kind of prize. Neighbors talked about how lucky he became, laughing about it in front of his gate. Meanwhile, Linda's nightmares returned. This time, she was alone, working endlessly under a burning sun, without a boy or a woman beside her. Her strength faded day by day, until one morning, she coughed violently, and blood spilled from her mouth. Alex rushed her to the hospital, but deep down, he knew something far beyond medicine had taken a hold of her. In the hospital, Linda told Alex something that made his blood run cold. When she was little, her dad once brought her to see a strange man. The room had been dark, lit only by a single lamp. She remembered incense smoke hanging in the air, and the man, murmuring words she couldn't understand. He had tied something around her wrist. Her father told her it was a blessing, a ritual for protection. She believed him. He was her dad. But now, lying there on the hospital bed, the memory felt different. Alex's expression hardened as she spoke. Whatever this curse was, it seemed that her father had set it in motion long before any of this began. Despite all of Alex's efforts, the talismans, the prayers, the sleepless nights, Linda's body couldn't hold on any longer. When the doctors called for her family, she broke down crying. because she finally understood the people who should have protected her were the ones who had betrayed her. Linda didn't survive. So, what do you guys all think happened here? Please pause the video here so you can share your thoughts in the comments below. Alright, so what do I think happened here from a Chinese cultural perspective? This one is a very heavy one, and it goes pretty deep, so I'll try my best to break it down from my perspective. But before I dive into my breakdown, I want to start off with what I think will happen to Linda's father for his heinous actions against his own daughter. I know many of you are probably disappointed that he didn't get the punishment he deserved, but in Chinese belief, particularly Buddhist-influenced thought, every action carries karmic consequences. A heinous act, especially one involving cruelty, betrayal, or harm towards others, especially your own family, creates extremely heavy negative karma, yi. That karma isn't instant, but it will always return. It might manifest as illness or madness before death, or misfortune that destroys his remaining descendants. In other words, his own fate and that of his own lineage would become cursed or doomed to misfortune until balance is restored. After death, he would face Simlowang, the king of hell who presides over the 10 courts of Diyu. Each court deals with a different type of sin, and his punishment would depend on what he did. For acts of extreme moral corruption, especially harming kin or committing spiritual transgressions, he would likely be judged in one or more of these. The 5th court, son of the king Yama, for betrayal and moral crimes. The soul is dragged by Mamin, ox head, and horse face, and thrown into boiling oil or flayed alive. The 7th court, for destroying family harmony, punishment in the mountain of knives. Or the 10th court, where his final reincarnation would be downgraded to the lowest life form or denied rebirth entirely, Wing Batsu Sung, never to reincarnate. In many folk beliefs, such souls become wandering ghosts, Guan Ye Gui, eternally starving, unable to find peace or return home. And now, let me move on to my breakdown of this story. From a Chinese cultural and Taoist Buddhist lens, using Gong Tao or any sort of black magic to manipulate fate is considered extremely taboo because it interferes with the balance of heaven, earth, and man. Tin Dei Yan. Gong Tao, curses, represents the extreme of selfish intent, bending karma to benefit oneself, usually at the cost of another. By sacrificing his own daughter as a spiritual shield, the father violated moral order. In Chinese moral philosophy, betraying your child for personal gain is an unforgivable act that disrupts the natural flow of virtue. Spiritually, the cosmos does not ignore that. The father's actions would accumulate heavy in karma, so in essence, his good fortune, with his lottery wins and success, it's only temporary. A borrowed blessing, paid for with his daughter's life essence. In time, this kind of karma always settles the debt. I personally think that he's on borrowed time, now that he's no longer shielded. What about the spirit of Miss Chen, the woman in Linda's dream? I think this is a classic example of yin debt and the cycle of vengeance. Miss Chen represents the concept of Yunling, a vengeful spirit born from deep injustice. In Chinese ghost lore, spirits like her don't move on because the resentful energy outweighs all other emotion. However, notice how she tells Linda, "You're innocent, just like my daughter was." That line shows moral awareness. She's not a mindless ghost. She's still bound to retribution, but she recognizes innocence. Her haunting is not a personal revenge, but a settling of a karmic debt. By harming the Chen family in life, Linda's father created an energetic bond between their bloodlines, a yin debt. When he later tried to shield himself with Gong Tao magic, that debt didn't disappear. It redirected to the next of kin, Linda. From a spiritual logic perspective, Miss Chen didn't choose Linda. She was drawn to the karmic thread connecting her grievances with her father's bloodline. I also want to touch on the raised ghost concept, Yuanguaizai. Master Gop's practice of Yuanguaizai is something often whispered about in Hong Kong and Thai Chinese culture. It's a morally great art, but not always evil, but dangerous because it manipulates yin energy and the natural cycle of death and rebirth. His guizai, spirit children, act as spiritual scouts, but in Buddhist terms, controlling wandering souls instead of releasing them creates karmic imbalance. Even though Master Gop helped, his role symbolizes how humans meddle with forces that are supposed to remain unseen. I've covered this topic in prior episodes already, so to avoid being repetitive, I won't go too much deeper on this practice. What about the spirit of Linda's brother? The medium, and later Master Gop's spirit scouts, both confirmed that the spirit of Linda's unborn brother was genuinely present in her house, but he wasn't hostile, he was used. In many black magic systems, Tai Gong Tao included, using the spirit of a fetus or a stillborn child amplifies the potency of a curse, because such spirits are caught between worlds. They have no karmic anchor, no reincarnation yet, and thus can be bound more easily. So Linda's father, most likely either knowingly or through the original ritual, bound his own unborn son's spirit as part of this curse's construction to anchor it to the bloodline. That's why the medium said that the boy was not malevolent. He was there because his essence was tied to the ritual, and he was being used as a component, not as the cause. Once Master Gop's talisman was placed beside Linda's bed, its function was to break the illusion and reveal the hidden spirits. That's when the spirit of the boy vanished from Linda's dream, because the disguise has been disrupted, and that's when Miss Chen appeared in her true form. This shows that the spirit of her brother was just a decoy to conceal the true spiritual source. The boy's spirit was bound, a passive participant, acting like an energy node in the curse. The real force behind the haunting was Miss Chen, whose vengeance has been redirected to Linda through her father's dark ritual. This might be a little confusing, so let me summarize it in simpler terms. So in life, Miss Chen lost her husband and daughter because of Linda's father and his friends. When she died, her spirit became what Chinese folk believe called a yunling, a vengeful, restless soul. For decades, she wandered, trying to locate the man who ruined her family. But he used Gong Tao magic to protect himself. That spell hid him from her sight and redirected her anger towards something weaker, his own bloodline. So she never found the father directly. The little boy's spirit already existed inside the household because the parents had aborted him years earlier. In Hong Kong and Thai Chinese belief, an aborted or stillborn child is called a toiling. If it isn't appeased through ritual, it tends to linger near the family, watching, but not necessarily evil. He wasn't looking for revenge, he was simply stuck. When the father cast his Gong Tao curse to hide from Miss Chen, he needed a blood anchor, something of his own flesh that would carry the punishment in its place. He used Linda, but to bind the spell more firmly, he also used the soul of the aborted son as a secondary anchor. That tethered Miss Chen's karmic rage to the brother's spirit, and then, through him, to Linda. You can think of it as a chain of mirrors. Miss Chen, the vengeful spirit, who followed the cursed pathway created by the father's Gong Tao when she was looking for him, which then led her to the unborn brother's spirit, which then led her to Linda, the living vessel. Alright, so I don't want to hog up too much time in this episode. I now want to pass the torch over to Jay, who will narrate 2 Jay Nightmare stories for us.
This happened when I was in the first year of elementary school. Thinking back on it now, I often wonder if it was a dream. I still remember that night very clearly, so a part of me doubts that it was just a nightmare. It was a very creepy experience. It was a July night, a real hot one. For a reason unknown to me, I suddenly woke up. I looked at the illuminated numbers on the alarm clock and saw that it was just after 3 a.m. Ever since I was little, I had an interest in ghost stories, and at every opportunity, I tried to watch anything mildly spooky on TV. But when it came down to it, to actually being confronted by something out of the ordinary, something kind of scary, I was a true scaredy cat. So when I woke up that night, I started to get a little spooked. I was immediately wondering why I woke up. I was suspicious and fear was knocking at the door of my mind, if that makes sense to anyone out there. Back in those days, our family slept in the same room as each other. My mum, dad, me and my sister used to sleep on roll-out beds. Hi, Jay here. Co-sleeping isn't that uncommon in Japan. Families often use 2 or 3 large futons spread across the floor in a tatami room to enable parents to sleep next to their babies or young children. Back to the story. Since I was awake, I looked around. I was curious to see if anyone else had woken up, but no one had. It's quite a lonely feeling as a child when you know that you're the only one awake at night, isn't it? I felt safe though, so I thought I'd try and get back to sleep. I shut my eyes in preparation for sleep, but after a few moments of them being shut, I heard something. I stiffened up, almost instantly, in fear, because I swear I heard a woman's voice say something like, "Help me." It was definitely coming from outside, but it scared the heck out of me. Our family home faced the national highway, but there were very few cars that passed at night. It sounded like the voice was coming from right outside, in that direction. Nowadays, a lot of apartments have been built in that area, and new neighborhoods have sprung up. Along with that, there are convenience stores, family restaurants, all sorts. So at night, there are a lot of people on the streets passing by, so street noise is perfectly normal. But back then, the nights were real quiet. There was hardly any street noise or people walking around in my area late at night. So you can imagine how freaky it was to hear someone say, "Help me," so late at night. It wasn't just a one-off. I heard that same woman's voice asking for help multiple times. She was saying it over and over again. I thought it sounded like she was in our garden. Something about her voice terrified me, but not as much as the proximity of that voice. You see, right outside the room we were all sleeping in was our garden. If I was to open the sliding door, all I would have to do was walk down the narrow and short hallway, and I would be at the door to the garden. So what I'm getting at is, the voice sounded very, very close. I was so frightened by the sound of this strange voice calling out for help, but not fully committing to it. It sounded somewhat disingenuous and somehow lethargic. It just lacked the urgency of a true call for help. And I think I was able to understand that, even at that age. Still, that call for help troubled me. It was frightening beyond belief. What was out in our garden? I shut my eyes and put my hands to my ears, but for some reason, I could still hear calls for help, even with my fingers jammed in my ears. After a while, the voice kind of just disappeared. It faded away. I wondered if the owner of that voice had wandered off. I felt a great sense of relief, in all honesty. But there was a feeling of fear that hadn't left me yet, a sense of unease. I felt, I don't know, but perhaps it was like the calm before the storm. So I decided to try and wake my dad up. He was sleeping next to me, so I gave him a couple of nudges. He didn't rouse though. My father was a policeman, and because of his line of work, he would often be a shallow sleeper. He would sometimes be on call for emergencies, and he was used to waking up at the slightest of noises, but not that night. I tried my best to wake him, but he was sound asleep. I began to panic, so I decided to go to my mum, who was sleeping just the other side of him. I didn't have much choice. I needed someone because I was scared. As I got up to step over my dad to get to my mum, that's when it happened. I heard it very clearly, and it came from the same room we were in. I heard an unknown woman's voice say,
"Help me."
It was the same voice I had heard out in the garden, but now it sounded like she was in the same room. I started freaking out. I thought I saw a shadow in the dark, but a pile of clothes can look like a monster if you forget that they're there in the dark. I'm not sure of what I saw, but I'm absolutely sure of what I heard. I screamed the house down. I was utterly terrified. I think I actually lost consciousness after that. I'm not sure if anyone came to my aid or not because I woke up at 6 a.m., our usual time for our family to get up. At that time, because no one said a word about it that morning, I decided to blame it on a nightmare. I had trouble sleeping for a long time after that, but that woman who wanted help never came back. I wonder if it was a dream? I'm not convinced though. I feel as if some kind of wandering spirit came to me that night because I was awake. Whatever it was, I'll never forget it. That memory has haunted me for years. This all happened when I was living in a dingy old flat in Nakameguro during my first year as a working adult. Back then I was determined to save money. I wasn't making much in my entry-level job, so I had to pick a flat that was within my limited budget. I found a cheap, worn-down place that had clearly seen better days. It was a 1DK, a single room with a tiny dining room kitchen in a 20-year-old building. The bathroom was practically a cubbyhole, a cramped unit bath with barely enough room to turn around in. The walls were so paper-thin that you could hear everything the neighbors were doing. I'm talking about every little sound. If the guy next door sneezed, I'd hear it. When their phone vibrated, it felt like the walls themselves were trembling. I didn't mind too much. After all, I was out most of the day working. I'd come back only to eat, shower, and catch up on sleep. At the time, the state of the place and the sounds from next door were nothing more to me than a minor inconvenience. Then it started. I remember the first time it happened. I came home one evening after a long day at work. I dropped my laptop bag by the door and was just about to head into the room when I felt it. An odd tingling sensation, as if I'd walked straight into a spider's web. You know that feeling, don't you? That sticky, clinging sensation that catches on your skin, lingering on your face and arms. The spider's web. I brushed my hands across my face, and there was nothing there. I thought little of it at first. A place like this was bound to have spiders, and worse. It wasn't unusual to find the odd cockroach scurrying around the floor, and if there were roaches, surely there would be spiders too, preying on them. So I brushed it off as a spiderweb I couldn't see and carried on with my night. But then it happened again. And again. Every time I came home from work, I felt that strange sensation, like invisible threads clinging to my face. I would stop in my tracks, frantically swiping the air around me, convinced there must be a web. And I hated spiders. But I could never find anything. No web, no spider, nothing. After a while, the sensation became more persistent, more deliberate. It wasn't just brushing against my skin anymore. It felt like something was deliberately touching me, caressing my skin, something unseen. I started feeling it almost every time I stepped through the door, and with that, the air inside my flat felt somehow different, heavier, like it was pressing down on me, suffocating. The once harmless feeling of walking into a web had become something sinister, something that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. Eventually, I had had enough. I tore through the flat, searching every corner, every crevice for a nest, for spiders, or anything that could explain what was happening. I left no stone unturned, checked every inch of the walls, the ceiling, even behind the fridge. But there were no webs, no spiders, just me alone with a gnawing sense that something was wrong. I did find a cockroach though, and I killed it on the spot. I considered the idea that it could be strands of my hair blown by the wind when I opened the door. My hair was long enough to brush my ears, so maybe I was just being paranoid. Feeling stray strands tickling my face. But no, that didn't really explain it. I checked the mirror, carefully examining for loose hairs, also my hair, after I had a bath or a shower to see if I was losing it. But I realized that the sensation wasn't from my own hair. It was different, and worse, it was getting stronger. The next evening, as soon as I stepped inside, I felt it again. But this time, it wasn't just a brief touch. It was like something invisible was wrapping around my face, sliding down my cheek, as if trying to get my attention. A deep sense of dread settled over me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something unseen was watching me. Waiting. Weeks passed with the same eerie occurrences. Then one day, in a desperate attempt to take my mind off of the flat's suffocating atmosphere, I invited two of my colleagues, let's just call them A and B, over for drinks. The mood at work had been tense, and a few beers and some casual conversation seemed like a good way to unwind. As we chatted about our living situations, I made the mistake of mentioning my flat's dilapidated state. "You wouldn't believe how run down my place is," I said, half joking, not realizing what those words would set in motion. To my surprise, A and B seemed intrigued, to say the least. They were saying things like, "We gotta see this place," and they insisted. And before I knew it, we were stopping by a convenience store to pick up some drinks and snacks, and then heading back to my flat. When we arrived, I saw A's eyes widen with surprise. "It's even worse than I expected," he said, laughing, clearly amused by the sorry state of the building. It kind of annoyed me, so I gave him a playful shove and said, "Shut up." I unlocked the door and I invited them inside. But as I held the door open, I noticed B standing there, frozen, his eyes locked on the entrance to my flat. He wasn't just staring though. He was completely spaced out, as if something had shocked him. So I say, "B, you coming in or what?" And he barely responds. Yeah?" His voice hollow. He walked in slowly, like he was stepping into something unpleasant. I thought he might have been drunk already, but we hadn't even started drinking yet. "Are you alright?" I said, giving him a concerned look. His eyes darted around the room nervously before he forced a weak smile and said, "Yeah, I'm fine." But there was something off about him. His movements were stiff, awkward, like he was trying to keep his balance, like something was bothering him. We sat down and drank, though the mood was strange from the start. A and I cracked jokes and we talked about work, but B remained quiet, barely saying a word. He kept glancing around the room, as if expecting something to leap out at him. I tried to ignore it, but the uneasy atmosphere was starting to get to me. Eventually, it was time for them to leave. We called a taxi, and while waiting for it to arrive, we stood outside to get some fresh air. B had been acting strange the whole night, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was seriously wrong. I walked them downstairs and waited with them for their taxi, and then, out of nowhere, B asked, "Is your flat an accident property?" "What?" I blinked, confused. "No, I don't think so. Of course not." B's face was pale. "There's a woman there. She hanged herself." A and I stared at him, completely stunned. A let out a nervous laugh, almost choking on his cigarette. "You can see that sort of thing?" he asked, incredulous. B nodded slowly, his eyes dark. "I don't always see them, but When I walked into your flat, I saw her. She's been hanging there the whole time. I felt my blood run cold. Why didn't you say anything earlier? I demanded, my voice shaking. I was angry. Or was he just making it up? Or was he onto something? I couldn't, he said in response. His voice barely above a whisper. She was staring right at me. If I said anything, I was afraid I'd be cursed. She seemed so hate-filled. Where the hell did you see her? I need to know. I blurted out. She was hanging just off of the ground by the front door. I guess that's where she ended things, he muttered. The moment he said that, everything clicked. The sensation of the spider webs, the constant feeling of something brushing against my face. I realized it wasn't a web. It was her hair. I had been walking through her hair every time I entered my flat. There was this coat hook on the back of the first internal door as you step into the flat. It was practically hanging out of the wall. It was an old brass, really strong one. I now know why it was almost out of the wall. The realization hit me like a wave of ice, and I felt the blood drain from my face. My legs went weak beneath me. Why the hell would you tell me this now? I shouted. I felt the panic rising in my chest. You're leaving and I'm going to be stuck there alone. But before they could respond, the taxi pulled up. A gave a sympathetic smile. Good luck with that, he said, as if it was some joke. And while B raised his hand in apology, they both climbed into the cab and drove off, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I didn't waste any time. I grabbed the essentials and I fled to a nearby all-night manga cafe. I spent the night there. From that moment on, I knew I couldn't bring myself to sleep in that flat again. I started searching for a new place immediately, bouncing between A and B's flats and different cafes until I found somewhere else to live. When moving day finally came, A and B helped me pack up and leave that cursed apartment behind. I didn't care how cheap it had been. I would never step foot into that place again. Years have gone by, but I was reminded of my experience a few months ago. I had some business back in Nakameguro, so out of curiosity, I wandered past the old flat, wondering if anyone had moved in. The building still stood, still as decrepit as ever, but I noticed an umbrella propped outside the door of the apartment I used to live in. Someone was living there now. I wonder if they've felt it yet, the spider's web, or if they've seen her. But none of that's my concern anymore, is it?
And that brings us to the end of tonight's special episode. I want to thank Jay Nightmares for coming on and lending his voice in tonight's stories. I wish you all a very happy and spooky Halloween. Stay safe and have fun. Welcome back. In tonight's episode, we're going to go into the heart of Osaka, Japan, where something strange and deeply unsettling happened just a few years ago. So this story takes place in a well-known hotel, one whose name starts with the letter T. Locals whisper about it. Travelers leave with uneasy memories. So what happened there? Well, let's just say it's the kind of experience that makes you never want to stay alone in a hotel room again. Let's dive in. Back in 2019, a Japanese musician, we'll call him Paul, was in Osaka for a short business trip. He wasn't exactly a celebrity, not a household name, more of a D-lister really, someone you might vaguely recognize on the street, maybe from a late-night music show or an opening act of a small concert. He was one of those artists grinding it out, still chasing that big break. Now, Paul was no stranger to this particular hotel. Every time he came to Osaka for work, he booked the same place, without fail. It wasn't fancy, but it was convenient. It was close to all of his favorite restaurants, and more importantly, just a short walk from the venue where he usually performed. On this particular trip, Paul didn't bother booking ahead of time. He figured he could just walk in and get a room, like he always did. But this time, things didn't go as planned. When he arrived, the front desk staff politely informed him that all of the rooms were fully booked. Paul didn't take it well. He was known to have a bit of a temper, and it showed. He raised his voice, demanded to know if they had any idea who he was. "I'm pretty famous, and I'm practically a VIP here," he snapped. "I stay at this hotel every time I'm in Osaka. You have to find me a room. Any room. I don't care what it is. Figure it out, and make it happen." Now, if you know anything about Japan, you know this. Customer service is everything. Even when faced with difficult guests, staff will go above and beyond to accommodate you, especially if you're a regular. And so they did. The hotel staff kept glancing at the screen and then at each other. Paul stood there, arms crossed, tapping his feet impatiently. After a few minutes of quiet murmuring behind the counter, one of them finally looked up with a polite smile. "Sir, we were able to resolve the issue. We found you a room." Paul snatched the keycard, grumbled something under his breath, and made his way to the elevator. The room was small, smaller than what he was used to, but that didn't matter. He wasn't planning to spend much time there anyway, just a place to crash between rehearsals, meals, and the show. But the moment he stepped inside, he noticed it. A strong scent hanging in the air. Not perfume, not cleaning solution. It was incense. The kind people burn during prayers or memorials. It wasn't exactly overwhelming, but it clung to the walls. It lingered. Paul wrinkled his nose. Weird, he thought. But he did say any room will be fine, and to the staff's credit, they made it happen, so he let it slide. Paul didn't waste any time. He dropped off his luggage, freshened up quickly, and headed right back out. One of the reasons he always stayed at this hotel, aside from the venue, was the location. It was only a few minutes' walk from one of the busiest streets in Osaka. Bars, restaurants, KTV lounges, pachinko parlors, you name it. Everything lit up in neon. The city buzzed with life even after midnight. He met up with a few of his buddies, grabbed a late-night dinner, and drank well into the night. By the time 2 a.m. rolled around, Paul was full, tipsy, and just ready to crash. He said his goodbyes, tossed his jacket over his shoulder, and made his way back to the hotel. Just a short walk, one of the perks of staying in his usual spot. But this night was going to be different. When Paul got back to his room, he didn't even bother washing up. He kicked off his shoes, tossed his jacket onto the chair, and collapsed onto the bed. His head was spinning slightly, still a little buzzed, but mostly just exhausted. And the moment his head hit the pillow, he groaned. "Ah, seriously?" He sat up, confused. Did one of my friends follow me back? He stumbled over to the door and looked through the people. Standing outside was a hotel employee, uniform pressed, hands clasped politely in front of him, just standing there. Paul blinked. What the hell? Why would the staff be looking for me at this hour? His mind raced. Did something go wrong with my credit card payment for the room? Did I maybe forget to sign something? Then another thought crept in. Maybe he's a fan. That happens sometimes. Wants an autograph maybe. Maybe even a photo, who knows? The man outside must have heard Paul lean against the door, because without knocking again, he suddenly spoke. "Excuse me, sir. I apologize for the late night disturbance. The front desk sent me. If you don't mind, may I come into your room?" Paul furrowed his brow. That's weird. So Paul unlocked the door and cracked it open. Standing right there was the neatly dressed hotel employee. Uniform was so clean, posture straight. He gave a small bow and continued, "I'm very sorry again, sir, for the inconvenience, but the guest who stayed in this room before you apparently left something very important behind. Do you mind if I come in just for a moment just to take a quick look? Paul hesitated. The guy looked legit, but something about the whole situation didn't feel right. 2 a.m., no prior call from the front desk. Still, Paul had already opened the door, so he nodded and let him in, but asked him to make it quick because he wants to go to sleep. The staff member didn't waste time. He stepped into the room and began searching frantically, checking drawers, behind the curtains, even crawling halfway under the bed. Paul just stood there, confused and annoyed, watching this guy scour the small space like he'd lost something important. After a couple of minutes, the man stood up, gave a deep bow, and apologized again. Then he left. Paul was irate now. Okay, what the hell is going on? It was almost 3 a.m. now, and hotel staff were barging into his room, looking for mysterious items left by somebody else. He collapsed back on the bed, hoping to get some sleep now. Then, his eyes shot open. You've got to be kidding me. He stomped back to the door and looked through the peephole again. Same guy, same uniform, same stiff posture. Sir, I apologize. May I come in to look for something the last guest left behind? Paul opened the door again, but before he could say anything, the man rushed past him and began searching the room again, retracing every single step he did before. Under the bed, behind the curtains, every drawer, nothing. Another deep bow, another apology, and just like before, he left. Paul slammed the door shut and stood there, his hands clenched. Now he is pissed. They're messing with me. That was the only explanation. He picked up the room phone and dialed the front desk, barking into the receiver. Get someone up here now. I'm done playing games. 3 staff members arrived minutes later, all bowing deeply as Paul stepped out into the hall. We're very sorry for the inconvenience, sir. How can we help? Paul's voice cracked with anger. Help me? Are you serious? One of your coworkers has come into my room twice in the middle of the night, barging in to look for some forgotten item from a previous guest. He didn't even wait for me to say yes the second time. He just rushed right in. What kind of manners is that? There was a long pause. One of the staff, a younger man, looked up slowly and asked, Sir, if you don't mind me asking, do you remember the color of his uniform? What color was his collar? Paul blinked, caught off guard. His collar? Green. Yeah, green. The staff exchanged glances. Then the younger man pointed to his own collar. It was red. Sir, he said carefully, we haven't used the green uniform in over a year. Our uniform colors were updated last spring. No one here on our staff wears green anymore. Paul frowned. Okay, so what are you saying? That the guy who came in doesn't even work here? Silence. Are you telling me that someone off the street just walked into my room twice pretending to be a staff? Because if that's the case, your hotel has a serious security problem. None of the staff seemed willing to say anything. They just stood there, nervous, avoiding eye contact, as if speaking the truth would stir something up. But finally, the young man who asked about the collar spoke. His voice was low. Sir, there was an incident in this room a few years ago. Paul narrowed his eyes. The staff continued. A guest once claimed they lost something valuable here. It turned into a pretty big deal. Security was called, and the blame fell on the young staff member. It was his first job out of college. He was publicly scolded by the manager, humiliated in front of other staff and guests, and that night he came into this room and hanged himself. Paul froze. Since then, the staff member said, there's been reports. Guests saying they've seen the same thing you pretty much told us just now. The staff was always polite, always apologetic. The young man lowered his gaze. That's why this room was closed off. We don't normally rent it out anymore. Today is actually the anniversary of the staff's death. This morning, monks came into this room and performed a cleansing ritual. Paul stood there, completely still. The scent of the incense. That's why it was there when he first walked in. It all made sense now. Without saying another word, he grabbed his luggage, slung his bag over his shoulder, and walked out of the room. He didn't even check out, he just left, because no amount of convincing, no proximity to bars or venues was worth spending another minute in that room. Sometimes, when a hotel tells you that they're fully booked, don't push it, because that last forgotten room they somehow found for you, it might have been left empty for a very good reason. Our second story also takes place in Osaka. Yujin, who wasn't originally from there, had just moved to the city for college. He grew up in a different prefecture, and while his family didn't have a lot, they always tried to support him as best as they could. Every so often, they'd send him a bit of money, just enough to cover rent, groceries, and maybe a few school supplies. But that was about it. He wasn't struggling, exactly, but there was never anything left over for fun. No nights out, no splurging on games or clothes, just enough to get by. One day his friend said something pretty obvious. Why don't you get a part-time job if you need the extra cash? At first, Yujin wasn't too keen on the idea. He had just started college and really wanted to just focus on his studies, but the thought lingered. Yujin had always been into fashion, like really into it, and as much as he tried to brush it off, the idea of being able to afford a few nice pieces of clothing now and then, it was really tempting. Eventually, he started thinking, maybe working a few nights a week wouldn't be so bad after all. So Yujin asked his friend, okay, but what kind of part-time job would even be worth it? I need something flexible, something that won't mess with my classes. That's when his friend leaned in a little and said, well, there's this app. Yujin raised an eyebrow. It's kind of weird, but you can rent yourself out as a boyfriend just for the day. Apparently, it was mostly older women using it. They pretty much pay to have a younger guy keep them company. They would take you out to dinner, take you to go shopping, maybe just walk around town for a little bit. And the pay? It's not bad at all. Whatever happens after that, his friend added, it's totally up to you. But honestly, most of the time, it's just dinner and a few hours of chatting. That's it, nothing sexual. It sounded strange, but also kind of harmless. And for someone like Yujin, who was quiet, polite, and pretty well dressed, it didn't seem like the worst idea. Later that night, back at his dorm, Yujin couldn't stop thinking about this app. How much could you really make doing something like this? He started doing some digging, went down a bit of a rabbit hole, scrolling through forums and message boards where real users shared their experiences. And that's when things got really interesting. One guy wrote about giving a shoulder massage to a client, nothing more, and walking away with 40,000 yen. That's almost $400. Another said just going out to dinner earned him 17,000 yen, and the meal was completely free. But the one that really caught Yujin's eye was a post where a woman had offered a deal. If you spent 2 hours with her, just dinner and a chat, she would let you pick out anything you wanted to buy, up to 60,000 yen. That's nearly $600. No strings attached, supposedly. It all sounded almost too good to be true. There were a ton of posts like that. Some people made even more. Yujin kept scrolling, eyes wide. For a broke college student, this was kind of a goldmine. No hard labor, no weird contracts, just hang out with someone for a few hours. Be polite, listen, smile, maybe give a massage if they ask nicely. But even that wasn't expected most of the time. And best of all, no strings, no pressure, and definitely nothing sexual. Just time, conversation, and free food. Honestly, it seemed like the perfect side hustle. By the end of the night, Yujin was sold. He thought to himself, why not? What's the worst that could happen? Yujin had always been told he was a good-looking guy. Sharp features, clean style, and kind of a quiet confidence that people naturally gravitate towards. But he never actually imagined that this would become a side hustle for him. Within just a few weeks of signing up, he was already getting tons of bookings. 10,000 yen here, 15,000 there. It started adding up fast. And with each successful session, Yujin found himself getting more comfortable, even confident. He started carving out more time in his schedule, taking on extra clients whenever he could. The income was steady, the work was easy, and before long, he was hooked. For the first time since moving to Osaka, he felt like he was really living, eating well, dressing better, even saving a little on the side. As the weeks went by, Eugen started getting pickier with his bookings. He proved himself on the app and had good ratings, good manners, and now he only took the higher paying offers. And then, one evening, a new message came through. One that made his jaw drop. "I'm a single woman, approaching 60 years old. I would love to book you for 3 hours. I want you to come to my house and cook for me. After we eat, I would like us to take a nap together. Don't worry, nothing sexual. I will pay you 300,000 yen if you accept." Eugen's eyes practically popped out of his head. 300,000 yen. That's almost 3,000 US dollars. For 3 hours, he replied instantly. There was no location listed on the client's profile, so he asked, "Are you located in Osaka?" The client responded, "Yes." But after chatting a little more, it turned out that wasn't exactly true. They were about 2 hours outside of the city. Pretty far, honestly. But for that kind of money, Eugen figured he could take the bullet train, maybe even stay somewhere overnight if he had to. It was a lot for one job. He agreed. That's when things started to feel a little off. Instead of sending him a location, or a pin, or some kind of address, the client replied with something unexpected. A photo. It was a hand-drawn map, step-by-step directions from the nearest train station from her house, sketched in pencil on lined paper. Who still hand-draws maps these days? There were little arrows, labels like turn left at the stone lantern or turn right at this location, and even a note that said, "If you reach the rice field, you've gone too far." Eugen just stared at it for a while, confused. Why not just send a Google Maps link? He figured maybe it was because she was older. Maybe she didn't know how to use smartphones very well. It was odd, sure, but 300,000 yen was a powerful motivator. So he shrugged it off. Probably just a harmless old lady, he thought. What's the worst that could happen? The next day, Eugen packed a small bag and headed out. He took the train to the station that the client had mentioned, some rural stop way out in the countryside. Once he arrived, he pulled out the photo of the hand-drawn map on his phone and began to follow it. At first, it seemed kind of charming, but after a while, it just started to drag. The roads were so long and narrow and dead quiet. No shops, no people, just endless stretches of empty land and scattered trees. It felt like he had been walking for hours. At one point, he muttered under his breath, "Where even is this place?" Just as he was starting to wonder if maybe he took a wrong turn, the final landmark on the map came into view. A crooked wooden sign with faded writing, just like it was drawn. He looked up, and there it was. Behind tall stone walls covered in creeping ivy was a massive house. More than that, it was a mansion, hidden all the way out here in the middle of nowhere. Eugen blinked, stunned. He wasn't sure what he expected, but it definitely wasn't this. Eugen walked up to the front gate and pressed the doorbell. A few seconds later, the intercom crackled to life. A woman's voice answered, calm and gentle. "Hello?" "Hi, I'm Eugen," he said. There was a pause. Then she replied, "Oh, you're finally here. I've been waiting all day for you." Eugen hesitated for a second. The way she said it wasn't creepy exactly, but it felt strange. Before he could respond, she continued, "Please, come in. Just push the gate open, it's not locked." He reached out and gave the gate a gentle push. Sure enough, it creaked open without resistance. He took a deep breath and stepped inside. As Eugen approached the front door, it opened before he could even knock. Standing there was a woman. She had told him that she was approaching 60 and didn't give him her exact age, but looking at her now, Eugen was surprised. She didn't look a day over 45. She was elegant and well-dressed, and clearly someone who took care of herself. She smiled warmly and stepped aside. "Welcome, please come in." The inside of the house was incredible. It was spacious, pristine, and quiet. So quiet. To the left, Eugen noticed a guest room with a neatly made bed and sunlight pouring in through the wooden blinds. To the right, there was a massive tatami room, wide open and almost museum-like in how perfectly aligned everything was. It was the kind of home you only see in the movies. "Wow," Yujin said, glancing around as they walked deeper into the house. "Your home is beautiful. Do you live here alone?" The woman gave a soft nod. "I do," she said with a smile. As they walked toward the kitchen, they passed by another room on the left. Yujin slowed down a little bit. Curiosity got the better of him. How do rich people really live, he wondered. He peeked through the open hallway. It looked like a prayer room. The lights were dim, but inside was a stunning altar. Intricately carved, polished to a soft glow, with a large statue of the Buddha sitting at the center. Incense sticks sat in the holder, long burned out, and golden ornaments framed the shelves. It was beautiful. Wow, Yujin thought, this is next level. But then, something caught his eye. Right in the center of the altar, just beneath the Buddha statue, was a framed photo that caught his attention. But the longer he stared, the more his chest tightened. It looked like him. Same hair, same face, same facial structure. Yujin's heart skipped a beat. Is that me? He thought. No, it can't be. It just looks like me, right? The more Yujin thought about the photo, the more uneasy he felt. His mind raced. Was that really me? Am I overthinking this? But no matter how he tried to reason with himself, that sinking feeling wouldn't go away. Still, he couldn't show it. The woman was standing right there. He forced a smile as she looked at him and said cheerfully, "Take a seat. I'll grab the groceries." Yujin nodded and sat down on the couch, doing his best to act normal. He glanced around the living room. Everything perfectly arranged, like a model home. But even in all that beauty, something about the place felt off. Too quiet, too still. A few minutes later, she returned with 2 large bags of groceries and laid everything out on the kitchen counter. Then she smiled and said, "All right, we can start now." That was part of the deal after all. So Yujin stood up, shook off that feeling in his gut, and made his way to the kitchen, trying to pretend nothing was wrong, even though every instinct in his body was screaming otherwise. At this point, Yujin had one thing on his mind: just cook the meal, eat it, receive his payment, and quickly get out of there. He moved quickly around the kitchen, trying to focus on chopping vegetables, boiling the water, and just anything to keep his thoughts busy. Behind him, he could feel her presence. She was sitting quietly on the couch in the living room, just a few meters away, watching him. Not talking, just watching. Yujin tried not to look back, but he could feel her eyes on him, the weight of her gaze following his every move. He forced a smile once or twice, just to be polite, but she didn't say anything in return. She simply sat there, hands folded in her lap, her expression unreadable. The entire time Yujin was cooking, his thoughts kept drifting back to that photo. It looked so much like me. Too much. He kept replaying it in his head, the face, the angle, the way it sat on that altar. By the time he finished plating the food and brought it out to the dining table, he couldn't take it anymore. She was sitting quietly, still smiling, still so polite. And maybe that's what gave him courage to ask. He sat down, took a deep breath and said, "Sorry ma'am, I didn't mean to peek earlier, but I noticed that on the altar in that room, there was a photo on it. It looked really similar to me. Is that me, or do you happen to know someone who looks a lot like me?" The woman paused, her smile softening into something distant. Then, in a calm tone, she replied, "That's my son." Yujin blinked. She went on, still composed, still gentle. "He was about your age when he passed away due to an illness. I really miss him terribly, still do. But one day, I was scrolling through that app, and I saw your profile picture. And for a moment, it felt like I was looking at him again." She looked at Yujin with a kind and sad warmth. "That's why I asked you here. I wanted to share a meal, lie down for a while, and just feel like I had my son with me again. Just for a few hours. She bowed her head slightly. I'm sorry if that's strange. At first, Yujun felt a wave of guilt. Maybe he had overthought everything. Maybe this was just a grieving mother trying to feel close to her son she lost. It was a tragic story. A little odd, but understandable. Maybe I'm just being paranoid, he thought. But even as he tried to convince himself, something didn't sit right. The way she talked about her son's death. So calm, so composed. And then, that smile. It wasn't warm. It was broken. It was just off. Subtle, but wrong. After dinner, the woman stood and smiled at him again. I'll take care of the dishes, she said. You can just relax a bit. Yujin nodded and stayed seated on the couch, still uneasy. As she moved to the kitchen and began rinsing the plates, Yujin quietly pulled out his phone. He went to a website he had heard about, one that lists homes in Japan where deaths have occurred. It's a public database, updated regularly. All you need is the address. He typed it in, and then, there it was. This house was listed. He tapped to expand the details. His eyes scanned the screen and froze. Cause of death. Mother with psychological history murders son with kitchen knife. Deemed mentally unfit to stand trial. Not incarcerated, still residing at the property. Yujin's stomach dropped. It all made sense now. Why she didn't give him an address. Why she hand drew a map. She didn't want him looking up any information about the home beforehand. He stood up, heart pounding. Didn't say a word. He walked straight out of the house, through the quiet hallway past the heavy front gate and down the long empty road. He didn't care about the payment anymore. Yujin never went back on that app again. Not after that. And from that day forward, he never ignored that uneasy feeling in his gut. Have you ever passed by one of those roadside motels in the middle of nowhere? It usually looks empty and falling apart. Do you ever wonder, how does a place like this even survive? Sometimes they don't. Sometimes they've been closed for years, and what's inside isn't meant for the living. Our first story for tonight is about one of these hotels. Welcome back everyone for another episode of Hong Kong Horror. I'm your narrator, Simon. This following story was shared by a man in Vietnam. Let's call him Quang. It happened to him during a long holiday, when him and his wife were driving back to his hometown to see their young child. This goes back more than 10 years ago. Back then, Quang was working as a restaurant manager. The restaurant was newly opened, so the workload was pretty heavy. Every evening after his shift, he would have to work overtime. Because of this, he hardly had any free time to himself. His wife, who worked as a server at another busy restaurant, also worked really long hours. Because of their packed work schedules, their 3-year-old daughter had to live with Quang's mother in his hometown, another province away. Quang and his wife tried their best to endure this lifestyle as best as they could. They felt grateful to both have a job in the city, so they wanted to make as much money as they could to provide a better life for their daughter. One Friday night, Quang and his wife had their first break in many months. That evening, after work, as Quang and his wife were eating dinner in front of the TV, his wife mentioned that they should take a drive down to see their daughter tonight, since they finally had some time off together. Quang really wanted to see his daughter as well, but he was also so exhausted from work. All he really wanted to do tonight was to enjoy his dinner, take a hot shower, and go to bed early. But as tired as he was, he knew his wife was right. They have to really take advantage of this rare time off from work. So he said, "Alright, let's go pack some stuff and head out." His plan was to drive through the night, arrive super early, and spend the whole day with their daughter. After they quickly packed some clothes, they set off around 11 p.m. Quang drove fast since the roads were pretty much empty during this time of night. Eventually, after speeding a bit, they made much better time than expected. When they were only 2 hours from his hometown, Quang suggested, "Hey, why don't we find somewhere to sleep first? If we get there now, it'll be 3 or 4 a.m. My mom will have to wake up and open the door for us. We won't be able to sleep until dawn, so it's probably better we try to find a spot now and get some rest until morning and arrive refreshed." His wife agreed. So, they slowed down and kept an eye out for some local signs for motels or hotels in the area. Eventually, they saw an old rusty sign pointing down a side road saying there was a hotel inside. It was the only sign they've seen for miles, so Kwang turned in. They drove for miles down this isolated, rural road, with no hotel in sight. They kept driving and driving, but all there was were trees and brush, but no hotel. "That must be an old sign. The hotel must be gone. There's nothing here," Kwang's wife said. Kwang agreed, and they decided to turn back and get back on the main road and try to find another hotel for the night. Kwang slowed the car down and carefully did a U-turn to start heading back on the main highway. As they were driving back, about a mile later, to their surprise, they saw the hotel on the side of the road. "That's strange," Kwang thought. Neither of them noticed this hotel the first time around. How is this possible? Were they both that tired that they both missed this large hotel standing right there? Kwang and his wife looked at each other with a confused look on their faces. But it was really late, and they were both desperate to take a hot shower and sleep in a soft bed, so they brushed it off and pulled up into the hotel parking lot. It wasn't a 5-star hotel by any means, probably not even a 3-star hotel, but it'll do for the night. It was tall, about 6 or 7 stories. The lot was completely empty, so they pulled into a random empty spot and shut off the engine. He turned to his wife and said, "Alright, let's rest here for a few hours before we get back on the road." Kwang's wife looked out the window at the strange hotel with some hesitation, still a little weirded out about how both of them missed this large structure the first time they drove by. But it was really late, and it would probably take them a really long time to find another hotel in the area, so she reluctantly agreed. They both hopped out of the car, grabbed their weekend getaway bag, and started walking toward the entrance together. Kwang's wife wrapped her arms around his as they were walking and asked, "Why are there no cars parked here at all? And why is the atmosphere so creepy?" She wasn't wrong. The surrounding area was forested, and the road was dirt. The hotel looked old and eerie. Kwang was a bit creeped out too, but he brushed it off. He also didn't want to let his wife know that he was a little creeped out too, because that might make her even more scared. "It's just how the countryside is. I've stayed at many hotels like this," he said. In reality, Kwang's never stayed at a hotel like this before. She didn't look convinced, but followed Kwang's lead inside. Kwang pushed the front door open, and they made their way into the lobby, which was empty. Kwang rang the bell at the front desk. Moments later, an older woman emerged from the back room with a smile on her face. Kwang returned the smile and asked for a clean room for the night. Nothing too fancy, just their most basic room will do. She opened the book, wrote out Kwang's name by hand, and handed him a key for the 3rd floor. As Kwang and his wife turned to head up to their room, she called out, "When you reach the stairs, take one item from the box and bring it upstairs." Kwang had no idea what she meant, but near the stairs, he saw an old cardboard box full of envelopes and papers. It looked like discount coupons or something like that. Kwang ignored it, but his wife, who was fond of freebies, grabbed one. They reached their room and began settling in. Kwang hopped in the shower first since he was more tired from such a long drive. As he was showering, he suddenly heard his wife scream. He rushed out, soaking wet, to see what the heck happened. She had opened the envelope she took from the box downstairs. Inside was a red talisman. Frightened, she threw it away and insisted that they needed to leave. Why would they ask guests to take a talisman before entering the room? Kwang was beyond exhausted now, lost his patience, and told her not to overreact. She grew pale and trembling, saying that something has to be wrong with this hotel. But Kwang brushed it off. He took a towel and dried off and went to bed. He was so tired, he passed out the second his head hit the pillow. He doesn't remember how long he was out for, before he felt like he was suffocating, as if drowning. He jolted awake, and the drowning feeling disappeared. It must have just been a nightmare. His wife was fast asleep next to him. and all was quiet and still in the room. As Kwang rolled over to his side to try to go back to sleep, he heard a strange noise by the door. It sounded like someone was trying to unlock the door. Kwang lay there in the dark for a few seconds, just listening. It was clearly the sound of someone trying to open the door. He slowly sat upright and shouted, asking who was there. A voice replied, "Room service. I'm delivering something someone ordered." Kwang sat there confused, at first thinking maybe his wife ordered food before she fell asleep. Kwang slowly hopped out of bed and made his way over to the door and peered through the peephole. He didn't see anyone out there. He then opened the door just to have a better look, to see if anyone walked off. No one was out there. The whole hallway was empty, not a soul in sight. If someone was just pulling a prank, there's no way they could have disappeared so quickly. What the heck is going on? Kwang thought. Then he looked down. There was a food serving tray, and on the tray, there were plates full of decaying food. Terrified, Kwang shut the door, still trying to figure out who was trying to prank him this late at night. He looked through the peephole one more time, but this time, there was someone standing outside. It was someone in the hotel uniform, standing out there, smiling in a very unnatural way as he was staring at the peephole. Kwang quickly opened the door again to confront this person, to ask them why they dropped off this decaying food at the door. But as soon as he opened the door, there was nobody there again. Really confused now, Kwang turned back to the bed, ready to wake his wife to tell her what was going on. But to his surprise, he saw her standing on the bed, tying a rope to the ceiling fan, about to hang herself. He had no idea where she got a rope from, but before he could figure it out, he lunged over to stop her. She was crying hysterically, saying she had a dream of someone telling her not to leave the room, and that if she wanted to survive, she must hide under the bed. She wasn't making any sense at all. She crawled under the bed. Kwang reluctantly followed under the bed, just to be there for her. If that's what made her feel safe, he'll just lay next to her. Kwang laid there, under the bed, next to his wife, who seemed to be falling asleep after her strange outburst. Kwang wasn't going to get any more sleep tonight, as he was still trying to figure out everything that was happening. That's when the stench of rot filled the air. Kwang tried to shake his wife awake to ask if she smells it. That's when he looked over and saw that the person next to him was not his wife at all. It was a dried corpse with sunken eyes, leathery skin, and bone-thin limbs. Horrified upon seeing this, Kwang bolted from the room, screaming for help. Some guests peeked out of their rooms. One man came in, checked under the bed, and told Kwang to look again. When he did, there was nothing there. Totally empty. No wife, no corpse, nothing. So, where did his wife go? Kwang ran downstairs and found her sleeping in the car. Shocked, Kwang asked how she ended up sleeping in the car when she was just sleeping under the bed a few minutes ago. Confused, she had no idea what Kwang was talking about. She said she had gone to sleep in the car a while ago because she felt too uneasy to stay after seeing the talisman. She saw Kwang sleeping so peacefully after his shower, so she didn't want to wake him and went to sleep in the car herself. Kwang, terrified now, told her to drive them away immediately. As they left, Kwang looked back. The hotel was dark and looked abandoned. There were no lights. The entrance that they had just used last night was now overgrown. Even the roadside sign that led them in was gone. Now, it was just an empty post. Later, Kwang learned that the hotel had been closed and abandoned since 1992. So who were the people that they saw that night? The woman at the lobby, the man who said he was delivering food, the person who tried to help Kwang. Were they all illusions or something else? To this day, Kwang never went back. Some of his belongings are still there. He left in such a hurry that he left his small bag of clothes and even his wallet. So, Hong Kong horror fans, what do you think happened here to Kwang and his wife? Before listening to what I think happened, please pause the video here and drop a comment on what you personally think happened. Alright, so what do I think happened here from a Chinese cultural perspective? There were a few key points in the story that lead me to believe that this hotel most likely had some unnatural deaths take place on the property before it was abandoned. Murder Accidents and people ending themselves are common tragedies that occur at hotels. Even after it's abandoned, the hotel still retains these imprints of these incidents. We often say that buildings remember violent deaths. From Kwang's experience, it seemed that he ran into quite a few different spirits on the property. Some of these spirits could have been related to the original deaths that took place here. Some of the others could be totally unrelated and might not even have died at the hotel to begin with. They may have been attracted to the area after it was abandoned. Abandoned buildings often become magnets for wandering spirits. Do you know why this is? It's because of the energy. Abandoned places are usually very yin-heavy. It's dark, still, damp, and forgotten by the living. Yin energy attracts yin, so ghosts, especially wandering spirits that have no descendants to honor them, might move in. So what about the talismans that the old woman told them to take before they went to their room? You might be thinking, I thought ghosts are usually scared of these talismans. So why were there talismans in this hotel? Yes, you would be right. Real talismans are meant for protection. These are always drawn by a real Taoist or Buddhist master to ward off evil. In this case, I don't believe these talismans were real talismans, but rather inverted protection talismans or traps. Spirits sometimes mimic rituals of the living, reproducing things they once saw in life, like burning incense or posting talismans, but their versions are often twisted with yin energy. These talismans were most likely something called yamfu, yin talismans. This does the exact opposite of what a real protective talisman does. Instead of repelling evil spirits, it'll draw them in instead. What about the part with the strange hotel worker and the decaying food? When Kwang looked through the peephole and sees the hotel worker, that was a direct spirit confrontation. Zhongce. Peepholes and mirrors are pretty dangerous because they frame and focus yin energy. Looking through one is like inviting the spirit to lock eyes with you. The fact that Kwang opened the door again and no one was there is a concept called guaidachang. He was seeing into the ghost's world, but that vision didn't exist in the physical space. If you recall from my previous episode, guaidachang directly translates to ghost hitting the wall. It's a term used when you experience things like walking or driving somewhere, and then suddenly you lose your sense of direction. Or no matter how much you walk, you keep returning to the same spot. Also, when the road seems endless, signs disappear, or when you're doing something and suddenly you look at the clock and you realize that a bunch of time has passed, even though it only felt like a few minutes have passed. Ghosts are believed to be able to trap humans in loops, such as these. It's not hallucination, but a yin world overlay. You're still in the real world, but your senses are hijacked. Not to get too off topic here, if this ever happens to you, there are some traditional methods to break free from this illusion. You can turn your clothes inside out. This supposedly disrupts the illusion. If you have a lighter, light it, as fire represents yang energy. Or you could try placing a bit of soil in your mouth to ground yourself back to the living world. Alright, so going back to Kwang's experience. The decaying food he saw outside his room was very symbolic. Food is very symbolic in Chinese ghost culture because hungry ghosts, all guai, crave offerings because they died with strong attachments or suffering. I believe the spirit was telling Kwang, this place is not for the living, just like how this food is not meant for the living, but it's for us. In a way, it was telling him to leave. Now, the spirit that Kwang saw afterwards, the one that appeared as his wife at first, I think this particular spirit was probably one of the spirits that died on the property. Spirits that are strong enough can create illusions that mimic people you trust. They do this to confuse you and lower your guard. The wife that Kwang saw, tying the rope, was most likely the spirit itself, taking on her form while replaying the way it died. This is a common theme in similar reports, especially in haunted hotels marked by people ending their own lives. The ghosts often teach or nudge the new guests to reenact their deaths. It's like the energy of the place wants to repeat itself. The rope to the ceiling fan suggests to me that someone actually did hang themselves here before. Kwang didn't stop his wife. He was interrupting the ghost's performance of its own death. But little did Kwang know at the moment, he was interacting entirely with the spirit when he was crawling under the bed with someone he thought was his wife. We call this guaimai. This translates to ghost bewilderment. where a person is trapped in an illusion until they break free. The wife under the bed turning into a corpse, that was the moment this illusion broke. Alright, so what about that man that came out of the room to help Kwang? First of all, if you recall, there were no cars in the parking lot when Kwang and his wife first arrived, so how can there be so many guests at this hotel? They were out in the middle of nowhere, so I highly doubt that real guests walked for hours just to come to this hotel. So that leads me to believe that everyone here were spirits. In haunted properties, not every ghost appears scary. Some will pretend to be ordinary people, neighbors, hotel guests, even staff, in order to gain your trust. They sometimes want to toy with humans, giving false reassurances, making you question your sanity, and sometimes leading you in circles until your yang energy weakens. I think Kwang and his wife chose the wrong place to stay that night and bumped into not one, but multiple entities. The property itself was probably haunted, which could be related to why this hotel was abandoned in the first place. If you're ever on a long drive and you see one of these rundown hotels with no lights, no cars, and that heavy feeling in your chest, just keep driving, because some places don't welcome the living anymore. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Hong Kong Horror. I'm your narrator, Simon. Do any of you enjoy traveling? And when you check into a hotel, how often do you think about the room itself? Who stayed in it before you? What kind of lives have passed through it? I'll admit, it's always on my mind whenever I check into a new hotel. Not the most relaxing mindset for travel, I know, but I can't help wondering, did anything tragic ever happen here? Tonight's story is one that's been floating around the web for a bit. It takes us to Fukuoka, Japan, where a Hong Kong family checked into a hotel and had a terrifying encounter that might just make you think twice the next time you settle into your own room. And as always, at the end of this story, I'll share my own interpretations from a Chinese cultural perspective. So stick around if you're curious about that. Alright, let's turn on the lights, get comfortable, and let's dive right into this one. This story was shared by a man in Hong Kong. Let's call him Robert. Robert lived in a modest apartment with his wife, their young son, and his elderly mother. Both he and his wife worked during the day, so his mom helped to raise their young child during the day. They were a really tight-knit family, the kind who always tried to take at least one overseas trip together every year. Travel for Robert and his family was never just about sightseeing. It was a way for them to step out of the daily grind, to sit down for meals together without rushing, to give his mother memories she could hold on to while she was still healthy enough to join them. You see, growing up, Robert barely traveled at all. His father wasn't in the picture. His mother had raised them all by herself in a cramped public housing estate in Hong Kong. Money was always tight. Vacations back then were a luxury that they could never afford. He's actually never taken a vacation in his life until he was an adult and started making his own money. Now that Robert was older, with a steady job and his own family, he swore things would be different. Every trip he took, he promised himself his mom would be there. Each journey was a way to repay her for everything she sacrificed to raise him, to give her experiences she's been denied all these years, while all she did was work as a janitor at a shopping center. So when the family planned their trip to Japan, Robert insisted that she come along. Fukuoka was the destination, a city famous for its food, its slower pace, and its family-friendly atmosphere. A perfect place for a few days of rest and relaxation. They booked a hotel room big enough for all four of them: Robert, his wife, their little boy, and his mother. Just like at home, they would all be under the same roof, ending each day together. At least that was the plan. Because what unfolded in that room would leave Robert unsettled long after they returned home. An experience that turned an ordinary family holiday into something he would never forget. Since this was their annual family trip, Robert decided to splurge a little to spoil everyone. Instead of the budget hotels they were used to, he booked a 5-star hotel for a few nights. They would stay there for a few nights before moving on to cheaper hotels for the rest of their stay. It was a stretch for their budget, but he figured, why not? His mom deserved it, his wife deserved it, and even his young son should have new core memories of comfort, luxury, and family. When they first entered the room, everything looked perfect. 2 large double beds, made up neatly with crisp white sheets, bright lighting overhead, a bathroom that looked absolutely spotless, gleaming like it had just been cleaned. On the surface, it felt worth the money. But almost right away, all of them noticed something was off. A foul smell. It wasn't overwhelming at first, just a faint, unpleasant odor that lingered in the air, clinging to the air, no matter how much they tried to ignore it. They spent a few minutes trying to figure out where the smell was coming from. It wasn't the garbage bin. It wasn't the bathroom. Robert even crouched down, sniffing near the air vents, thinking maybe the filters were overdue for a change. The best way to describe it, it was like that damp smell you get when a towel or piece of clothing never dries properly. You hang it up, you think it's fine, but instead of that fresh, clean scent, it leaves behind this sour, almost pungent odor. Robert thought maybe it was also the air conditioning. The filters probably needed to be cleaned. His wife assumed it might be the cleaning rag that the housekeepers used to wipe the room down with. His mother didn't say much, though Robert noticed her brow furrow slightly, as if the smell reminded her of something she couldn't quite place. No matter how spotless the room looked, something about that odor made the space feel less welcoming. After a few more minutes of searching and coming up empty, they gave up. It wasn't like the smell was unbearable, but in a 5-star hotel, you notice these things. Robert finally picked up the phone and called the front desk. He explained the situation politely and asked if there was any possibility of moving to another room. The staff apologized right away, their tone professional. They understood, they said, but unfortunately, it was peak season. Every other room was already occupied. There was nothing they could offer him except to bring up a few air fresheners if he wanted them. Robert politely declined and hung up. Disappointed, but not surprised. Japan in the summer is always busy. It wasn't like they could just walk out and find another hotel, not with his mother and young son in tow. So, they decided to make the best of it. They unpacked what they needed, tried to ignore the damp odor, and went on with their day. That night, after a long day out, they returned to the hotel. Dinner had been fun. They went to a conveyor belt sushi spot nearby, the kind where the plates kept rolling past and you just grab what you want. The mood had been light, everyone laughing, their bellies full. When they got back to the room, things quieted down. They took turns using the shower. Robert laid back on one of the beds, half watching the TV, half scrolling through his phone. His wife was in the shower, the sound of running water humming steadily behind the bathroom door. On the other bed, his mother was playing with his son. She was smiling, moving a small toy truck back and forth with him, keeping him entertained while he giggled and clapped. While they played, the boy lost his grip and the toy truck rolled across the blanket, bounced off the side, and disappeared into the shadows under the bed. The boy immediately reached down, pointing, "Truck, truck!" Robert's mother gave him a reassuring pat, then leaned forward, slowly lowering herself to check under the bed. And that's when the mood shifted. Grandma bent down to help. With one hand on her knee for support, she used the other to lift the edge of the bedspread, peering into the darkness beneath. And that's when it hit them. The smell. It grew stronger instantly, wafting out from under the bed in a way that made Robert wrinkle his nose. It wasn't just the faint dampness they had noticed earlier. This was sharper, heavier, like the smell of damp clothes, mixed with the odor of rotting meat. Robert looked up from his phone, uneasy. He saw his mother frozen there for a moment, her eyes fixed on the space below the bed. "Ma, you okay?" he asked, swinging his legs over the side. He started to stand, ready to come over to help her find the toy truck. But before he could take a step closer, his mother let the bedspread drop back into place. Her voice came out sharper than usual, firm in a way that made Robert pause. "Moya, Moya, nothing's there," she snapped. waving him back. Don't come over. He continued trying to come over to check, but she scolded him harshly, with unusual firmness. 我都話冇嘢咯. I said there's nothing. Leave it. We'll get him a new toy. Robert blinked, caught off guard. His mother almost never raised her voice at him. She sounded shaken, though she was trying hard to hide it. For a moment, the room was silent, except for the muffled sound of the shower running behind the bathroom door. Robert sat there, staring at her, the unease in his chest tightening. He didn't want to push her, but deep down, he knew something wasn't right. She insisted on sleeping on that bed herself, the very one she had just peeked beneath. Robert didn't like it. Something in her tone, the way she had snapped at him, told him she wasn't being honest with him. But she was his mother, and she was stubborn, so he let it go for now. That night, Robert, his wife, and their son crowded onto one bed. His mother lay down alone on the other. Robert tried to distract himself with the television again, but his mind kept circling back. The room wasn't that big. How could a toy truck just vanish like that into thin air? He checked the floor. He checked around the edges. Nothing. And his mother's reaction when he wanted to look under the bed. It wasn't normal. She had looked right at something before dropping the covers again. He was sure of it. What did she see that she doesn't want to talk about? The odor still lingered faintly in the air. That damp, pungent smell. No matter how much his wife sprayed her perfume to mask it, it clung stubbornly, like it was coming from deep inside the room itself. Robert laid awake far longer than he meant to, staring at the ceiling. Something about this place was wrong. And by the time the truth came out, he would wish he had pressed his mother that very first night. For 2 nights, they stayed in that room. Each night, no matter what they did, that odor persisted. They tried running the air conditioner, spraying perfume, even leaving the bathroom vent on all night. But the smell was always there, hanging in the air like a warning. By the time they checked out, Robert's mother was in bad shape. Her skin looked pale, her body weak. She complained of dizziness and nausea. On the way to their next destination, she began vomiting, and Robert had to rush her to a local hospital in Fukuoka. The doctors said it looked like some kind of infection or heat exhaustion, but Robert couldn't shake the feeling that it was connected to that room. They cut the trip short. When she was stable enough to fly, the family brought her back to Hong Kong. Even then, she was bedridden for days, shivering with a fever, unable to keep food down. It was only after she began to recover, when she was finally strong enough to speak more, that she admitted the truth. Robert sat at her bedside, asking her again and again what had taken place in that hotel, why she had reacted so strongly, why she had insisted on sleeping on that bed. And she finally told him. That night, when she lifted the bedspread, Robert's mother had seen something that wasn't meant to be seen. Curled up in the shadows beneath the bed was a small child. Its skin was pale, drenched, as if it was just pulled out of the water, hair plastered on its forehead, and in its tiny hand was the missing toy car. The child looked straight at her, and then it smiled. Not the kind of innocent smile you would expect from a child. Something off, stretched just a little too wide. The eyes fixed on her as though it had been waiting. Slowly, deliberate, it began crawling forward, inching out from under the bed. In that moment, instinct took over. Terrified, she dropped the bedspread back down, snapping it shut like a curtain, and forced herself to act as if nothing had happened. She told Robert there was nothing there. She insisted on sleeping on that bed herself, shouldering that fear alone, and said no more about it, fearing that it will ruin everyone's vacation that was already fully paid for. Hearing his mother's confession, Robert finally pieced everything together. Why the toy had vanished, why that damp, rotten smell never left, and why his mother had insisted on taking that bed for herself. She had carried the weight of that fear in silence, and afterwards, she carried that sickness in her body for 2 full 2 full weeks, only recovering after visiting a spiritual master back in Hong Kong who helped cleanse her of lingering energy. So, what do you think happened here? Who is this mysterious child under the bed? Was it the ghost of someone who had once died in that room, an accidental drowning that the hotel kept quiet? Or was it simply a wandering spirit that found shelter beneath the bed? Please pause the video here and let us know what you think in the comments below. Alright, so what do I think happened here from a Chinese cultural perspective? Let's break it down a bit. There's a few things that stood out to me. The first was the smell. In Chinese culture, there's a very old belief that the world of the dead carries a scent. When yin energy gathers, it often manifests as odors, damp, rancid, rotten, or moldy. The Cantonese term "sapmei," damp smell, is sometimes used when describing a haunted place. It's not that clean dampness of rainwater, but a heavy suffocating stench, like mildew, that refuses to leave. Smell, in Chinese tradition, is considered one of the senses most sensitive to the spirit world. Unlike sight or hearing, which can be doubted or brushed aside, smell is harder to explain away. When you walk into a new place and that pungent, sour odor clings to you, even if the room looks perfectly clean, it's often interpreted as a warning sign. Some Taoist masters explain it this way. Yin spirits, especially those who died tragically or violently, retain moisture. Their presence creates a wet atmosphere. That's why ghost encounters are so often linked to water or to cold drafts. It's not just a coincidence that Robert's mother saw a wet child under the bed. The odor of dampness was the first sign that the spirit was already there. The second thing that stood out to me was what Grandma saw under the bed. In Chinese culture, children are believed to be closest to the spirit world. I'm talking about living children. Their yang energy, the vital life force that protects us, hasn't fully matured. That's why babies and toddlers often cry at nothing, or point to things in corners that adults can't see. Elders will even say, 小朋友眼靈通. Little ones are spiritually connected. But when it comes to a spirit child, that's a different story. It's considered one of the most yin presents that you can encounter. Why? Because a young life cut short is viewed as deeply unnatural. The soul doesn't want to leave. It lingers with grievances, confusion, or longing, all of which amplify yin energy. Now, the way the grandmother described it, drenched, pale, curled up, those details are pretty creepy. In folklore, spirits that appear wet are almost always tied to water-related deaths, drowning in the sea, a river, or even a bathtub. Water is yin in nature, and it's believed to anchor a spirit, preventing it from moving on. That's why rituals for drowned souls are especially elaborate. They need to be guided properly, or else they remain bound to the place of their death. And then there's the toy truck. Spirits, especially child spirits, are drawn to objects they're familiar with. They crave attachment. When a ghost picks up a belonging from the living, it's a way of bridging the world with ours. In some traditions, this is seen as a form of borrowed life, a spirit clinging to the vitality of the living by holding onto their possessions. So what was it that Robert's mother actually saw? I think she most likely saw the ghost of a drowned child, still trapped in that room, hiding under the bed. By taking the grandson's toy, it wasn't just playing, it was reaching out, showing resentment for the life it lost, or even trying to latch onto the boy's energy. This is why her reaction of dropping the covers and claiming the bed makes sense culturally. In many Chinese families, the elder will silently absorb the risk rather than expose the younger ones to danger. She didn't want her grandson, already marked by losing his toy, to be further entangled. In Chinese families, it's often said that the elders carry a heightened sensitivity to the unseen. Some believe it's because with age, the body's yang energy weakens, and the boundary between yin and yang thins out. In other words, the closer you are to life's end, the easier it is for spirits to approach you and be seen by you. But there's also the cultural role of the elder. In traditional Chinese thinking, it's the elder's duty to protect the younger generations, to absorb hardship, so the children and grandchildren don't have to. That's exactly what Robert's mother did. When she saw the ghost child under the bed, she didn't scream or reveal the truth. She pulled the blanket back down, claimed that bed for herself, and silently bore the burden. It's the kind of silent sacrifice that speaks to the instinct of a parent who's lived through scarcity and struggle. A mindset of better me than them. The cost of that decision, though, was illness. In Cantonese, we call this chung sat hei, being struck by contaminated spiritual energy. When someone encounters a restless spirit, especially up close, it's believed that the body absorbs that yin. The result? Fevers, weakness, nausea, even prolonged sickness that doctors can't easily explain. It's not just psychological, it's the body being weighed down by what doesn't belong to it. This is why, after returning to Hong Kong, Robert's mother needed to see a Taoist master, a cleansing ritual, often done with incense, blessed water, and chanting. This is believed to purge this dirty energy. Only after that, she began to recover. Without such a ritual, many believe that the sickness could linger indefinitely, or even shorten a person's life. So in the grandmother's reaction, you could see both sides of Chinese tradition, the spiritual reality of yin contamination, and the cultural instinct of an elder protecting her family at any cost. She carried the sickness so that her son and her grandson wouldn't have to. She carried what she witnessed in silence so her family wouldn't panic and have the trip ruined. It's a chilling reminder that sometimes the scariest part of these stories isn't the ghost itself, but the quiet sacrifice someone makes to protect the people they love. So who was this child under the bed? The most likely explanation, given the details in the story, is that it was the spirit of a child who drowned, maybe in the hotel pool, maybe in a bathtub. These accidents happen quietly. Spirits of drowned children are said to linger in damp places, carrying that heavy odor of wetness. The fact that Robert's mother described the child as drenched and pale supports this. Another possibility is that the child wasn't tied to the hotel at all. In Chinese belief, wandering spirits sometimes attach themselves to families, following them from place to place. Hotels, being transient spaces, can act like way stations for such entities. The son's toy truck might have attracted it. Child spirits are often drawn to toys or candy. Thank you, Hong Kong horror fans, for making it all the way to this point of the video. I hope you enjoyed this week's episode. I'm looking forward to speaking with all of you again next week. A few years ago, I worked as a cashier at one of the major convenience stores here in Hong Kong. The store was open 24 hours a day, and I usually worked the night shift. The story I'm about to share with you took place during Ghost Month, which happens in July. For those of you who are not familiar, Ghost Month is a deeply rooted tradition across many parts of Asia. It's believed that during this month, the gates of the underworld open up, allowing the spirits of the deceased to wander freely in the world of the living. It's a time filled with respect and a little fear. And on one particular night, I experienced something I'll never forget. That night, I was working with my usual coworker, Sally. It was just the two of us. Our shift started at around 10 p.m. and it ran until 8 a.m. the next morning, a schedule that I was already very familiar with. In fact, I had worked so many nights with Sally that we both preferred the night shifts because it was usually quieter, slower, and honestly, it just suited us. Most nights, the store stayed pretty empty. Once in a while, a few late night guests would wander in for snacks or cigarettes, but for the most part, it was so quiet that Sally and I would sometimes take turns napping in the back room while the others stayed up to man the register. It wasn't a bad setup. The slow hours gave me time to read, catch up on books, or just work on little personal side projects while the city slept around us. It was peaceful. At least it usually was. A little while later, on this night, a young woman came into the store. I glanced up from my book and out of habit, I said, "Welcome." She looked like she was probably in her early 20s. She was dressed pretty normally, nothing that really stood out. She wore a simple white blouse and a pair of khaki pants like a young professional. I figured she probably stayed out late for a work function or something like that and is probably coming in for some water or juice. She didn't say anything back as I said welcome. She just quietly made her way toward the back of the store, over to the fridges where we kept the cold drinks. I didn't think much of it. I just shrugged it off and went back to reading my book. But I could hear her pacing lightly in the back for a few minutes. It sounded like she was just trying to decide what she wanted to buy. Maybe a late night soda or tea, nothing unusual. But then, without buying anything, she just simply walked back out of the store again, silent. She didn't say anything at all. I just brushed it off again. She probably changed her mind about getting anything and went back to my routine. About half an hour later, though, she came back in. Same young woman, same slow, quiet walk through the door. I greeted her again. Welcome. Still no response. And just like before, she drifted toward the back of the store, back to the refrigerators. She moved almost exactly the same way, wandering near the cold drinks. I was looking at her now, and I noticed something strange. She wasn't really looking at anything. It was more like she was just standing there waiting for someone or something. Just to make sure everything was alright, I put my book down, stood up, and walked to the back of the store, where she was still quietly lingering near the fridges. I approached her and asked her politely, "Is there anything I could help you with? Or if there's anything I could help you find tonight, please let me know." I also told her that I noticed she came by earlier, so I figured she was probably looking for something specific. She didn't react right away. For a few seconds, she just stood there, almost like she didn't hear me. And then she finally looked up and smiled at me, shyly, and said, "Oh, sorry, I'm actually not trying to purchase anything tonight. Honestly, I'm just here because I'm waiting for my boyfriend. He's across the street right now playing video games at the internet cafe. He doesn't know that I'm waiting for him, so I've just been roaming around, killing time. I hope that's okay if I stay here for a bit." I appreciated her honesty, so I smiled back and I said, "Oh sure, that's no problem at all. It's dark out. It's probably safer for you to just wait inside anyway. Take your time." So she nodded and lingered back by the shelves near the fridge, standing there quietly as she waited. Since we had someone else in the store now, I didn't feel right just sitting down and reading my book again. It would look bad if a customer saw me slacking off, so I decided to find something work-related to do. I slipped into the back room and started unpacking some boxes, just new stock of drinks and snacks, and a few other items, just getting everything ready for the day shift workers who would come the next morning. Sally was still sleeping in the break room, curled up pretty peacefully, and I didn't want to wake her, so I moved as quietly as I could as I was unpacking boxes, just slowly, one by one. The store was so quiet. You could hear the rustle of the packaging and the low hum of the refrigerators, but those were pretty much the only sounds in the whole store that night. I wrapped up in about 40 minutes or so. No other customers had come in during that night, and the store stayed pretty eerily quiet. I headed back up to the front by the seat, by the register, and the girl was still there. She was still standing in the same spot near the fridges. She was still waiting, standing super still just like before, and it doesn't look like she moved at all. Since neither of us seemed like we had much going on, and it was getting close to 4 a.m. at this point, I figured I might as well try and make some small talk with this girl. As I was chatting with her, Sally woke up. She stretched, yawned, and then wandered out toward the front. She also spotted this girl and gave her a friendly hello. And then she tapped me lightly on the shoulder and said, "Hey, I'm heading out to grab our food." We usually ordered from the same late night restaurant every night, so Sally already knew my usual order. It was routine for us, and tonight it was her turn to pick up the food. So I nodded, and Sally headed out into the dark street, leaving me alone in the store with this quiet girl. The girl and I ended up chatting for over an hour. Honestly, just about regular things, her life, a little about my life. And it was actually really easy to talk to her. We were around the same age. I think she was in her 20s, as was I. and it just felt comfortable, casual. She told me she worked at a clothing store not too far from here, and I smiled and I said, "Oh, I'll look for you one day. We should hang out sometime." But then that's when she looked down at her feet and just quietly said, "Oh, you won't find me." I just stood there for a little bit and I blinked because it was such a strange response. Why wouldn't I be able to find her? Before I could ask more about that, she shifted the conversation and started talking about her boyfriend. Pretty much saying that he wasn't always the best boyfriend, and she mentioned almost casually that sometimes he would hit her, and once he dragged her up to the roof of their building. I was pretty shocked and concerned. I leaned in and asked what happened when he dragged you up there. She continued looking at the ground the whole time as she was talking, and she just stayed quiet for a few long seconds, her eyes wandering off somewhere far away, and then she just said, "Oh, nothing happened. He's more scared than me now." The way she said that phrase just sent a strange chill through me. I didn't know what to make of it or what it even meant, so I just smiled politely and nodded. Something about her answers always felt off, like she was holding something back. Like there was more she wasn't telling me, but I didn't want to push her. Sally returned with our food. As she walked in the door, she saw the girl still, and she gave a little laugh and said to the girl, "Oh wow, you're still here, huh?" Just joking around. The girl smiled back politely, and Sally just headed straight to the back with our takeout bags with our food in it. Around this time, the newspaper deliveries were starting to arrive. They're always right on schedule. Since I usually work the night shift, I've gotten pretty familiar with most of these delivery guys. I never knew their names, but they usually just drop off the newspapers and left, but we always exchanged friendly hello and bye, and sometimes a little banter thrown in there, and tonight was no different. One of the regulars pulled up, hopped out of his van, and carried the bound stacks of newspapers and magazines to the front of the store, like he always does. As he set them down, he grinned at me and joked, "Hey you, what are you doing just standing here tonight? Have a seat or do something productive, you slacker. Don't just stand there alone, doing nothing." He laughed and then he jogged back to his van. He waved from the driver's seat and then drove off to continue his route. I just stood there. I was pretty confused because I hadn't been standing here doing nothing by myself. I'm standing here clearly chatting with this girl in the store. That's when Sally called from the back saying, "Hey, our food's ready, come and get it." I turned around toward her and I responded, "Okay, I'll be right there." But when I turned back around toward the girl, she was gone. There was nobody in front of me or in back of me or anywhere in the store. There was no sound of the door opening or footsteps, no goodbye, no nothing. It was so strange. We had just spent over an hour talking, and it was a nice conversation. So why would she just suddenly leave without saying anything? Without even giving me her name? I did not hear the door chime or even footsteps, so how could she just have slipped away so quietly like that? So I rushed outside, and I scanned up and down the streets in all directions. It was totally empty. There's nobody there. No one on sidewalks, no one across the street, no one in any of the nearby shops that were all closed. The streets were just totally empty and still. It was almost like she just vanished. I went back into the shop and told Sally what just happened. So she's listening to me as she's unpacking our lunch from the takeout bags. She looked as confused as I was, especially after I mentioned what the newspaper delivery man said. We both agreed something wasn't adding up, so we decided to check the security footage from that night. We rewound the tape all the way back to the first time that this girl should have showed up into the store for the first time. We watched the monitor closely, but there was nothing. No sign of her. No one entered the store. No one walked past the register to the back to where the fridges are. All you can see is just me looking up from my book, saying welcome, and then going back to reading. So then we fast forward the tape to when this girl came into the store the second time, and there was still nothing. All you can see is me getting up from my chair, walking toward the back of the store, and just talking to myself. There was nobody there. The footage became more and more horrifying as we watched. I was just standing there chatting and laughing for over an hour by myself. And then we got to the part where the delivery man showed up, and just like I remembered, he dropped off the stack of papers and then looked up towards me and saw me alone, standing there by myself. So no wonder he joked the way he did, because from his eyes, and from the camera's point of view, I was just standing there all alone, talking to no one. That's when my blood ran cold, because this can't be real. Sally saw this girl too, clear as day. But yet, on the security footage, she was never there. I started thinking, did I imagine everything? Had it been such a long and exhausting night that my mind created an imaginary friend for me to talk to for over an hour? No, it can't be it, because Sally had spoken to her too. Once when she left to pick up the food, and once again when she returned. We both saw her. So if that's true, then who was this girl that I spent the past hour talking to? As I sat there trying to make sense of it, another memory crept up in my mind. A few months earlier, not too far from the store, maybe like a 5-minute walk, I had seen a couple fighting on the street one late afternoon. It was a loud and ugly scene. A whole crowd gathered to watch. It was a boyfriend and a girlfriend. The boyfriend was causing commotion by kicking over trash bins and just screaming at this girl at the top of his lungs. The girl just stood there, quiet, and just stared at the ground while he kept screaming at her. A few days later, I saw a news report that a girl had been murdered. She was dragged to the roof of her building and then thrown over by her boyfriend, right in the same neighborhood a few minutes from the store. So I couldn't help but wonder if that couple that I saw that afternoon were the same couple in the news article that I saw. And more terrifying, is the girl I spoke to at the store the same girl from that news article? Had everything somehow lined up that night so that our paths crossed one last time? Even now I still can't explain what happened. All I know is that I'll never forget that night, or that girl. Hey everyone, welcome back. Tonight, we're heading back to Hong Kong, and this time, we're diving into one of the city's most notorious roads, one of the major highways in Tuen Mun. Now, if you've lived in Hong Kong or spent some time there, chances are you've at least heard of it. It's not officially the deadliest road in the city, but it's definitely earned a reputation. Over the years, there's been a string of major accidents. Not just little fender benders, but serious, often fatal crashes. And along with that, a whole bunch of creepy stories and strange sightings have been reported over the years related to this major highway. So here's the thing about the Tuen Mun Highway, it's not just the number of accidents that freak people out, it's the stories that come with them. Over the years, a lot of taxi drivers have reported something seriously unsettling. They'll be cruising down the road late at night, and suddenly, they swear they've hit someone. They slam the brakes, jump out of the car, heart pounding, but there's no one there. Nothing, not a scratch, not even a sign of anyone on the road. Then, there are the sightings people say they've seen someone hanging on the overpass as they're driving beneath it, just dangling there. But by the time they pass and do a double take, it's gone. Nothing's there. Creepy, right? So these are just a few examples of the stories from this highway. There are so many like it, but of course, we won't have time to cover all of them in one episode. So tonight, I'm just going to share one story with you from this highway. So turn on the lights, get comfy, and let's dive into one of the eeriest local legends tied to this particular highway. Now, I first heard of this story from a caller who phoned into a paranormal radio show back when I was there. Every country seems to have one of these. Late-night radio stations with eerie music in the background, and just people calling in to share their supernatural experiences. I always love tuning into these and just hearing the local legends and experiences. But this particular story, this one really stuck with me. It really gave me goosebumps, so I hope you guys will like it too. This particular incident happened years ago, early 2000s. There was a man, let's call him Kwan. He was getting off work late one night. It was around 11 p.m. He was tired, just looking to get home, and he was going to take the bus that eventually goes onto this highway in Tuen Mun. Now, just to give some quick context for those of you who aren't familiar with the public transport in Hong Kong, There are two types of buses. There's the minibus and then there's the full-size bus, which are double-deckers. When I say bus in this story, I'm talking about those big double-decker ones. And one more quick thing, unlike the double-deckers that you see here in the States or in the UK, both levels of the ones in Hong Kong, they're fully enclosed. So the upper deck, it's not open air or anything like that. It's just like the lower deck, sealed up, with rows of seats and big windows and lighting and air conditioning. Alright, so with that in mind, let's get back into what happened to Kwan that night. He waited at the bus stop like usual, and when the bus finally rolled up, he hopped on and headed straight upstairs like he always did. Kwan preferred sitting on the top level. The views were better, it was quieter, and he had one favorite seat, right behind the staircase. It's pretty much this little corner where you don't have to look at anyone's head in front of you, and there's just a nice bit of privacy. It's the perfect spot if you want to just zone out after a long day. Now let me paint a picture for those of you who've never been on one of these buses back in the early 2000s. The lighting was always pretty bad. It had this cold, flickery fluorescent glow that made everything look a little off. People's skin would take on this yellowish green tint almost. It was almost sickly. It wasn't flattering at all. And late at night, it made the whole upper deck just feel very unsettling. Like you're sitting in a ghost story waiting to happen. And honestly, even now in 2025, some of these Hong Kong buses still have the same lighting. I don't know if they just haven't upgraded the bulbs, or maybe it's an older model of bus that I got on. But if you've ridden one late at night, you know what I'm talking about. It just sets this weird, eerie mood, especially when the rest of the city outside is pitch black. But of course, for Kwan, this was just a normal night, a normal ride home. At least, that's what he thought. Now, on this particular night, even though it was already late, maybe around 11 or 12 at night, there were still a ton of people catching the bus. Kwan had gotten on at an earlier stop, so he managed to snag his usual seat at the upper deck, but every other stop after that, packed. Every single stop. More people were waiting, and the bus just kept filling up. By the time they hit the last stop, before heading onto the highway, the bus was already completely full. Every single seat was taken, and the lower level was packed with standing passengers, shoulder to shoulder. As the bus left the last stop and started heading toward the highway, Kwan noticed something. The bus was moving unusually slow. Not just like a casual cruise kind of speed, more like it was struggling. The engine started making this deep, heavy noise, like it was pushing way too hard just to climb a small hill. And then the whole bus started vibrating. Not the usual bumpy road kind of shake. It felt like the engine wanted to give out. The floor felt like it was pulsating. Kwan looked around, and a few people seemed to notice this too. Some glanced at each other, confused, but no one said anything. Then, the engine just died. The whole bus went quiet. The driver put it in park and stepped off the bus to check things out. Everyone sat there, waiting, wondering what was going on. A few minutes later, he came back inside and tried to start it up again. Turned the key, nothing. Tried again, still dead. Finally, he stood up and shouted, "Everyone, off the bus. The bus is broken. You'll have to wait outside for the next one." So now, it's nearly midnight. You've got a packed double-decker bus, stranded. People are tired and irritated, asking themselves how they got so unlucky tonight. Now, since there's only one staircase to get downstairs from the upper deck, and with the bus being totally packed, it was going to take a while for everyone to file out. Kwan wasn't in any hurry, so he figured, what's the point of rushing just to stand outside? So he stayed seated for a bit, waiting for the crowd to thin out. Made sense, right? May as well enjoy the seat while he still had it. He turned around to glance at the rest of the upper deck, and noticed that about 10 other passengers were doing the same thing, just sitting there, like him, calm, unbothered, just quietly waiting. Kwan thought, alright, smart crew, no need to push and shove, we're just all gonna end up in the same spot anyway. Some of them were gazing out the window, others just sitting back like they had all the time in the world. Eventually, once the aisle cleared up a bit, Kwan stood up and started making his way downstairs. As he looked back one more time while descending the stairs, those 10 passengers were still there, still sitting, still motionless, not even reaching for their bags, not even looking toward the exit. They looked totally calm, like they weren't in a rush to go anywhere. Most of them were just staring out the window. Kwan figured maybe they're just going to wait until the next bus comes before they bother getting up. So Kwan's standing outside now, just like everyone else, waiting for the next bus to show up. It's late and he's kind of regretting his decision to get up so soon. He thinks to himself, man, I should have just stayed upstairs like those smart passengers who stayed behind. Would have been more comfortable sitting down, at least. And as he was thinking that, he glances up, just casually looks toward the upper deck of the bus. That's when something strange happens. His eyes locked onto one of the passengers still seated upstairs, a man, sitting perfectly still near the back. And the moment their eyes met, the man started to smile, but not like a friendly smile. This was something else. It was slow, unsettling. Just this eerie, deliberate grin stretching across his face as he kept his gaze locked onto Kwan. Kwan, caught off guard, gives a polite little nod, the kind of automatic reaction you get when someone makes eye contact with you, and he quickly looks away. Then he looks back up again. The man is still staring at him, and now his smile is even wider. The kind of smile that looks very forced and awkward. Combined with that sickly yellow-green light from the bus's fluorescent bulbs, it made this man's expression look wrong, almost distorted. Kwan felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. Something about that smile just didn't feel human. And then, something even stranger happens. As Kwan kept watching, he noticed the other passengers, the ones who stayed on the bus, all slowly turning their heads toward him, one by one, all of them, staring at him with no expressions, except that man, still smiling. Eventually, after what felt like forever, the next bus finally showed up. Everyone started climbing aboard, including Kwan. He found a seat near the back, still feeling a little shaken, but trying to brush it all off. Probably just some weird guy trying to mess with me, he thought. But as the new bus pulled away, Kwan couldn't help but glance back at the broken down bus still sitting on the side of the road. By now, the lights had been turned off. The inside was completely dark. But as his bus passed by, he saw them. Those same passengers were still all sitting exactly where they were before. They were all staring at him still. Every single one of them just sitting there in the dark. Eyes all locked on Kwan as he rolled past. So what do you guys think really happened that night? Were those just regular passengers who, for whatever reason, didn't feel like getting off that broken down bus? I mean, maybe they were just tired and planned to take the next bus instead. But if that's the case, why did the driver shut off the lights on them? Or could they have been something else? Spirits maybe? Lingering on the road already known for its dark history and tragic accidents? Let me know what you think. Was Kwan just imagining things? Maybe the creepy lighting and the cold AC played tricks on his mind. Or did he come face to face with something not entirely human? Alright, I know I said I would only share one story tonight, but I don't think that single story was enough, right? Okay, let me share one more with you then. This story also takes place in the same area as the previous one. This story happened to a minibus driver in Hong Kong. Let's call him Mr. Lau. He used to run the late night routes, driving from Seung Sui through the quieter districts, long after most of the city had gone to sleep. He's been retired for a while now, but there's one ride he'll never forget, one shift that changed how he saw the job and the world around him. Most of his years behind the wheel were uneventful, just long nights, the occasional drunk passenger, maybe a stray dog crossing the road. But this night, this was different. It happened about 15 years ago. Mr. Lau was doing his usual late night run from Tuen Mun up to Seung Sui. That stretch, especially after 9 PM, is usually dead. No traffic, no noise, just the low rumble of the engine and the dashboard lights glowing in the dark. He rarely picked up more than a passenger or two that late. Some nights, no one at all. But this night, something felt off. It started like any other shift, a little after 10 PM. He was cruising through Seung Sui. Streets were quiet. The radio was crackling faintly with the static. Nothing unusual. Then, he saw them. Up ahead, at a stop that was usually deserted. It was a large group of people, just standing there, under a flickering street lamp by the bus stop. He slowed down, puzzled. By this hour, most people were home already. There's nothing much in this area to begin with. But the group didn't move, didn't talk. They just stood there perfectly still, faces shadowed in the orange glow. Already something felt wrong. But what could he do? Maybe they missed the last bus. Maybe they were coming home late from work or dinner. So, he pulled over and opened the door. The passengers got on one by one. They dropped the coins into the fare box without saying a word. No eye contact, no smiles, just blank stares and quiet footsteps as they headed toward the back of the bus. It was odd, but not alarming. Not yet. The rest of the drive was pretty uneventful. No more passengers, no strange detours. When they reached the end of the line, the passengers all just got off in silence. No goodbyes, no thank yous. Just another quiet night. Or so he thought. Back at the depot, Mr. Lau turned in his fare box like usual, dropped it off, and then he went home. But the next evening, the moment he walked into the depot, his boss was waiting. Didn't say a word, just shoved a handful of crumpled paper into Mr. Lau's hands. At first glance, it looked like cash, but it didn't feel right. The paper was too thin, too dry, and the designs, they were all wrong. They weren't real bills. They were hell notes, joss paper, the kind that you burn for the dead, offerings for the afterlife. These were in your box you turned in. His boss snapped. What kind of joke is this? But Mr. Lau wasn't joking. He remembered those passengers paying with real money. He heard the coins drop, saw the bills go in. He swore it. But of course his boss didn't believe him. He thought he was pulling some kind of scam, swapping out the money and pocketing the real bills. Mr. Lau was furious. He'd driven for years, never had anyone question his honesty. So the boss said, fine. He'd take the route himself that night. Same route, same time. And sure enough, the same group of passengers was waiting at the same stop again. They boarded, paid in real Hong Kong dollars, and sat down quietly. The boss watched every step. But when he returned and opened the box again, hell notes again. He didn't say anything at first, just stared at the notes in his hands. The next morning, he went straight to Wang Daixin Temple, came back with the talisman, bright yellow, covered in red ink symbols. Mr. Lau didn't question it. He just hung it on the rearview mirror that day, just in case. He didn't care how it looked. After what happened, he wasn't taking a chance. That night, Mr. Lau took the wheel again, talisman swinging gently from the mirror. As he neared that same stop, he braced himself, but this time, it wasn't a crowd, just a young couple. Nothing strange about them. The man wore a black leather jacket. The woman had a handbag slung over her shoulder. They looked like a normal couple, heading home. They stepped on, paid in cash, and sat down right behind Mr. Lau. At first, nothing felt off, but soon, the air inside the bus started to change. He couldn't explain it, just heavier somehow, like something unseen had joined them. Mr. Lau glanced in the mirror, and that's when his blood ran cold. The woman's face? Half of it was gone, torn away, exposing bone and the hollow socket where her eye should have been. And the man? His body was mangled, chest caved in, arm was twisted in an unnatural angle. But when Mr. Lau turned to look at them directly, they were fine, perfectly normal. The woman was adjusting her bag, and the man was looking out the window. But in the mirror, they were monsters. Mr. Lau's hands trembled on the wheel, sweat pooled under his shirt. He tried to keep his cool, tried not to scream, not to break, not to show anything. He just kept driving, pretending like everything was fine. But inside, he was falling apart. Then, he wet himself out of fear. Yep, he wet himself, but that's how real the fear was at the time. Even if he wanted to, Mr. Lau couldn't stop the minibus. There was nowhere to pull over, just a long stretch of highway. Eventually, they reached the Tuen Mun area. The couple finally spoke. Next stop, please. He raised his left hand in silent acknowledgement and pulled over to let them off. The couple hopped off the bus and walked away like nothing happened. But Mr. Lau knew what he saw. Back at the depot, Mr. Lau told his coworkers everything he saw. Then, he collapsed and woke up in the hospital. Doctors said it was due to stress. That was the last night shift he ever did. He went back to day shifts after that, and now, whenever he sees a minibus with a yellow talisman hanging from the mirror, he just wonders, did that driver experience the same thing as him? Hey everyone, happy Wednesday. Welcome back to another episode of Hong Kong Horror. Simon here. Tonight, we're heading over to mainland China for a pretty terrifying story that happened to a man who was trying to help someone out of kindness. Let's call him Yushin. After our story, as always, we'll break it down together from a Chinese cultural perspective to see if we can figure out exactly what happened to him. Now, let's turn down the lights, get comfortable, and let's dive right into it. The story started out as an ordinary night. It was a Friday night, and Yushin was out at a night market with his friend Larry, having suye, a late-night dinner. This particular incident took place back in the early 2000s. Yushin and Larry were old friends, and every so often they would meet up at this night market to catch up on life over some cheap eats. Tonight was no different. They've done this a million times before. Yushin recently bought himself a moped, which he was mainly going to use to get around town, but he also thought that maybe he could use it to make some money as well. Maybe use it to deliver food or something. That night, he drove it with him to the night market to show it off to Larry, and this innocent act actually got him into a situation that he would never forget for the rest of his life. Yushin is a hard worker, and he moved to Guangzhou to find work. He grew up in a rural village that was close to Larry's, so they go way back. Larry? He still lived in the village, but he would make his way out to the city about once a month or so. The two of them would always meet up like this whenever he does come out. Yushin remembers this night particularly clearly, even though it took place over 20 years ago. Him and Larry were laughing, joking around, having a great time over a plate of grilled oysters with mountains of minced garlic, chopped chilies, and scallions. It was about 11 p.m. at this point, but the night market was still super busy, with a ton of people all gathering over delicious food, unwinding from the work week. Yushin was exhausted. He works a bunch of odd jobs during the week, but he will never miss the chance to see his old friend. Larry complimented Yushin on his shiny new moped. "Wow, dude, it looks amazing. You're gonna make so much money if you use that to make food deliveries. Tell you what, if you give me a ride back to the village, I'll give you 80 RMB. Yushin hesitated. In his mind, he thought, sheesh, back to the village? At this hour? The distance from where they currently were back to the village is not a short ride, especially on a moped. It's a cross-province journey that takes a lot of energy. Yushin shook his head and said, I don't know, man. It's kind of late. I kind of just wanted to head home for the night after this. It's far as heck, and those roads are not the easiest to drive at night. Despite the initial refusal, Larry didn't give up. Dude, you're off from work tomorrow. Just give me a ride. I have to pay the cab anyway, so I'd rather give that money to you. You know you could use it. Larry shoved the cash into Yushin's hand. Yushin looked down at the money and back at his friend. He was torn. One part of him wanted to go home and sleep, but 80 RMB was a lot of money at the time. Larry was right though. He really was off from work tomorrow, so it's not like he has to wake up early or anything. Also, he could really use this extra money that would otherwise be going toward a random cab driver anyways. He sighed and said, I hate you, Larry, but I also love you at the same time. Hurry up, get on the moped so I can get you home. The two friends paid for their meal and made their way over to Yushin's moped. Yushin started the engine and sped off into the night, with Larry riding as his first passenger ever. The traffic was pretty bad getting out of the city, but Yushin threaded through the gaps and weaved through the cars, eventually escaping the busy city roads and made their way onto the more rural roads. The scenery began to change drastically, from the bright city lights to wider, forested roads and less cars. Yushin doesn't come back to the village often, especially to the part where Larry lived, so Larry had to navigate him when they got close. The little roads to get to his house were very deep and isolated. Many of these roads were one-way lanes, concrete strips surrounded by overgrown grass. There were silent village houses scattered far apart. The streetlights here were further apart, and they were either flickering or dead. leaving only Yushin's headlights to cut through the darkness. The deeper they went, the quieter and darker it became. By the time they reached Larry's house, it was almost midnight. Larry hopped off, gave Yushin a big hug, and they said their farewells. "Thanks, man. Let's do this again next month," Larry said, before he made his way into the house. Now, Yushin was alone. He paused for a moment to light a cigarette to ward off the cold of the night and drowsiness. He looked around. It was so quiet compared to the city. He hasn't been back to the village in a while, and he almost forgot how quiet it gets here. Yushin sat there for a few minutes, finishing up his cigarette as he soaked in the silence before starting his engine back up again. He turned the moped around to head back to the main road. Riding alone on such a dark, isolated road was not fun. His headlights swept across the tall grass and trees. Yushin tried his best to pay attention and kept his eyes on the road until he reached a sharp bend in the road up ahead. The streetlight at the curve happened to be broken, so the only light came from his bike. As he banked into the curve, his headlight hit something standing there by the roadside under the broken street lamp. Yushin slowed down immediately. It was a woman. She stood there in the darkness, wearing a long, light-colored dress. She looked extremely out of place. She was very well dressed, clean, and her hair was done up in a neat bun. It looked as if she was getting ready to go to some sort of formal event with the way she was dressed. If Yushin was being honest, she looked extremely beautiful, even in the dim lighting. Yushin's heart skipped a beat when he first saw her because he was surprised someone was standing there at this time of night. But then his heart melted because he became intrigued as to who she was. She stood there perfectly still, staring blankly into space. But as Yushin slowly approached on his moped, she slowly raised her right hand and waved him down to stop. Yushin was a bit confused. Who was this gorgeous girl? And what in the world was she doing here, standing here alone at midnight in a place this isolated? This is so dangerous for her. His survival instinct screamed at him to stop. But then another thought crossed his mind. Maybe she's a factory worker, or a local who finished a late night shift and can't find a way home. Leaving a woman here all alone at night seems dangerous. Yushin decided to pull over beside her to see if she needed help at all. He looked at her as he slowly rolled up next to her. "Hey, miss. What are you doing out here alone so late? Are you going to the main road? Get on. I'll drop you off there. It's dangerous to be standing here alone this late at night." The woman stared blankly at Yushin, not showing any sort of emotion whatsoever. She didn't answer, only nodded slowly once. She spoke in a low voice, so low it sounded like she had no strength left to speak. "Yes, okay. Thank you." Yushin scooted forward to make room for her to sit in the back seat. The woman slowly stepped toward the bike and climbed on, sitting sideways like most women do when they ride a moped. The moment she sat down, the first thing that Yushin noticed was the weight. Creak. The rear shock absorbers bottomed out completely. The front of the bike even lifted slightly as she sat down. What the heck? Yushin thought. How is it possible that she's even heavier than Larry? Yushin felt uneasy. He swallowed hard, but tried to think positively, figuring that maybe something was wrong with the shocks. He slowly twisted the throttle and rode off into the darkness toward the main road, which wasn't too far away. After about 5 minutes, the atmosphere changed again. The air, which was already cool, suddenly turned freezing. Yushin's hair stood on end. Along with the strange sudden cold, there was also a very bad smell. As the wind was hitting his face, he kept getting little whiffs of something that smelled salty from the person behind him. It wasn't perfume or sweat. You could only describe it as the smell of wet dirt mixed with that salty smell, as if he left meat out for days. It was so bad that Yushin nearly gagged. He had to hold his breath and sped up to get to the main road faster. He couldn't believe that such a beautiful girl would smell so bad. The smell was such a turnoff for him that he was no longer even interested in getting to know her. As he accelerated, the bike began to wobble. Yushin started to feel a shaking motion coming from the back seat. Thud, thud, thud. It felt like the woman was shaking her legs or something as the moped was cruising along. Anyone who rides a bike or moped knows that if a passenger shakes their legs rapidly, the bike will lose balance. It becomes very difficult to control because of the shaking. Yushin had to brace his arms and grip the handlebars tight to stop the moped from tipping over. He started to get irritated now. What the heck was this woman doing? "Miss," Yushin yelled out, "please stop shaking your legs. The bike is losing balance and it's hard to steer. We might crash if you keep doing that." Yushin was starting to regret picking this strange woman up at this point. As soon as he finished speaking, the shaking stopped. The bike became steady again. Yushin took a long breath, thinking they reached an understanding. But less than a minute later, the shaking returned. This time, it was even harder, faster, and more violent than before. Thud, 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 thud. The moped swayed from side to side. It felt like someone was stomping their feet on the bike. Yushin was livid now. This is a brand new moped. What in the world was she trying to do? He thought maybe she was playing a prank on him or something, so he decided he was going to stop the bike to talk to her. He slowed down, but instead of turning his head to look at her, he glanced into his rearview mirror to see why her legs were shaking so much. The mirror was tilted down toward the road, showing only the lower half of her body. But in the reflection, the woman's legs were hanging perfectly still beside the bike. Her legs weren't moving at all. Yushin was a little confused now. If her legs aren't moving, what was shaking the bike so hard? Driven by a desperate need to know, Yushin let go of the left handlebar. His trembling hand reached for the mirror as he slowly tilted it upward, higher and higher, until it aimed at the woman's face. The moment the mirror reached the right angle, Yushin froze in shock. In the mirror, the woman's appearance looked totally different from the one he picked up minutes ago from the side of the road. Her dress was filthy and soiled. Her hair was no longer tied in a neat bun. It was now a mess, partially covering her face. Her body was sitting upright and perfectly still, but her head was thrashing and snapping around in extremely violent and abrupt movements. It wasn't normal head shakes. Her neck was jerking left, right, front, and back with extreme violence. Yushin even saw her head snap so far back that the back of her skull nearly touched her spine, then whip forward instantly. She was thrashing her head with a force that no human neck could survive. That was the source of the vibration. Yushin was pretty sure he could even hear the sound of her neck snapping and cracking behind him, competing with the sound of his engine. Then, the most terrifying part happened. As Yushin looked at her in the mirror, terrified, her face suddenly stopped as she looked directly at Yushin through the mirror. Her face was bloated and discolored, blotchy. Her eyes were wide, bulging almost out of their sockets, staring intensely into his. She locked eyes with him through the mirror. Her lips slowly peeled back into a grin that stretched from ear to ear. "What are you looking at me for?" Her voice thundered with rage. Yushin screamed in pure terror. His natural reflex kicked in as he squeezed the front brake with all his might. The front wheel locked, the bike flipped, and Yushin was thrown over his moped. He laid there on the ground, stunned and dazed. When he finally managed to struggle to his feet, he looked back at his moped, which was now laying on its side on the road. The headlight was still shining into the grass ahead. He scanned the area frantically, but all he found was emptiness. There was no trace of the woman. No one was there. Yushin didn't wait. He scrambled to lift his bike back up, hopped back on as fast as he could, and sped out of that area until he reached the main road. He saw a security booth for a housing estate nearby and rushed toward the security guard. Thinking back on it now, The security guard must have thought he was some crazy person. Yushen ran up to him looking disheveled and acting like he was on drugs or something. He stammered out everything that just happened. As the guard listened, his face turned pale, and he told Yushen something that made him even more terrified. "Brother, I think you met her," the guard said. "Did this happen in the bend at the road back there? Just last week, there was a major accident. A woman was riding her bike home alone at night, and a drunk driver lost control at the curve. He hit her full force. Her body was thrown against a utility pole. Her neck was broken instantly. She died on the spot." After that night, Yushen never gave Larry another ride back to the village again. He also never stopped to talk to random people, no matter how hot they were. So, Hong Kong horror family, what do you think happened here to Yushen? Please pause the video here and let me know what you think. Alright, so let's break this one down from a Chinese cultural perspective. What's going on here? There's a few things I want to talk about in this one. First, the biggest mistake that Yushen made was stopping for this woman. There's a Chinese saying, 夜路不載人, which translates to, do not pick up passengers on night roads, especially on more isolated roads where there normally aren't much people around to begin with. Yushen ignored his initial instinct to keep driving. This isn't about being nice to a stranger in need, it's more about boundaries. The world is divided into Yuangai, the world of the living, and Yumgai, the world of spirits. So when you're traveling alone past midnight, the boundary becomes thin. Yushen stopped his moped, acknowledged the woman, and even invited her onto his vehicle. This isn't just about kindness anymore. This is allowing something from the Yumgai, world of the dead, into your personal space. He gave her permission to enter his domain. Everything we do matters. The act of stopping alone formed a connection, Giyun. Yushen created a temporary bond and a permission link. This is actually why ghosts often do things like waving for help, asking simple questions, or seeking acknowledgement in some way or another. They want to create that initial connection. If Yushen continued driving and ignored her, that would have been enough to deny that initial connection. Now, Yushen stopped out of the kindness of his heart, but sometimes you really have to judge the situation and follow your initial instincts, because sometimes you don't know what you're being kind to. What he should have done was to just keep driving. Don't make eye contact, don't respond, and don't acknowledge. But later, but you, if you don't engage, it won't disturb you. These types of spirits rely heavily on attention, acknowledgement, and permission. If you remove these out of the equation, they lose access to you. As for the type of spirit that this woman was, she's something we call Lo Bing Guai or Lo Guai. This translates to roadside ghost. They fit under the category of spirits known as Wan Sei Guai, violent death ghosts, and Yun Wan. These are spirits of people who died very suddenly. They don't accept their death, remain stuck around the location of death, and often they will try to interact with the living. Now, if you remember from past episodes, there's a subcategory of spirits called Debotling, earthbound spirits. This female roadside ghost, Lo Bing Guai, most likely is in the earthbound spirit subgroup, Debotling, meaning she's tied to a specific location and can't just leave freely. She will repeat behaviors within a fixed range. I wouldn't be surprised if other drivers passing by that bend in the road will come across her again on different nights. More often than not, these types of spirits do not fully realize they're dead, because death came so quick to them. They're oftentimes stuck in confusion or routine, so their behavior often looks like they're waiting for something, or just repeating certain actions. She most likely is reliving the thought of having to find her way home. Also, I want to add that new ghosts in this category are usually more dangerous compared to ones that have been around a little longer, because immediately after death is when their state of shock and resentment is extremely high. Confusion is also extremely high, while awareness is extremely low. This creates a very unstable spirit that can lash out unpredictably. lose control of their form, and they often shift between calm and violent states with no coherent reason. So now you might be thinking, but Simon, I thought they're bound to their location. Isn't this woman leaving the location by riding on Yushen's moped? Interesting question. But let's go a little bit deeper to understand this concept a bit better. When we say that the spirits are bound to their location, it doesn't mean to one exact fixed point. Think of it more like a radius. It's not a specific dot on the ground. The death site is the center, but the spirit can extend outward with a limited range. If you recall from the story, as Yushen and the woman got further away from the bend in the road, things started to shift. Her form started to change more towards her true form at death. It's not a matter of her getting weaker the further she was away from the center of where she was anchored. It's more that she was becoming more and more unstable. In Chinese folk belief, especially Deiboling and Wansei Guai, distance from the death site doesn't reduce power in a clean linear way. Instead, it's more like it introduces distortion, leakage, and loss of control. When she was at the center of her death site, her form was extremely stable, where she was even able to maintain an illusion of her beautiful self and life. She appeared calm and even human. Why? Because that location is saturated with her yin energy. Think of the center of her anchor point as a place with the strongest signal and stable manifestation. The further she moves out of it, the more interference there is to that signal. But the energy doesn't disappear. It just becomes more noisy and unstable. There's less control and more leakage of her true form. Maintaining that clean dress, calm, beautiful human appearance requires control. It's an actively maintained mask. The further she got from her anchor point, the illusion started to fall apart, where she started to reveal more of what she actually is through the rotting smells and body distortions. So think of it this way. The further from the anchor point, the more chaotic and less contained the output is. At the center, she can suppress her death state, but as she begins to destabilize with distance, her Seizhong, state of death, overrides everything else. It's not that she's choosing to reveal this form of herself, it's more so that she can no longer hold herself together. This also explains her aggression spikes as well. Yunhei Sathong. This is where the danger also increases, because the control drops, rational behavior decreases, and emotional residue increases, leaving behind only raw resentment, shock, and pain. She lashed out, screaming at Yushen, asking what he was looking at her for. She's acting out instinctively now. She's destabilizing physically and mentally the further she gets from the center of her anchor point. This brings us to another question that I think many of you might have. So, what was the end goal for this woman? What did she want with Yushen? So, there's no clean single answer to this question. Oftentimes, the answer is not that simple. It's usually a mix of instinct and compulsion. I think a better question we should be asking instead is, what forces were acting through her? I believe there are layers to her actions. The most baseline layer would be the looping behavior. Behavioral replay. This is a fresh, Wansei Guai, wronged spirit, so her mind isn't functioning normally. Right now, it's closer to a memory stuck on repeat, and a final intention that was never completed. In her case, it was most likely her final intention of wanting to go home. This became her loop, as she tries to continue her journey home after death. At this base layer, she's reenacting the actions of finding a way home. Now, the layer on top of this is the directional instinct. So even though this woman doesn't fully understand that she's already dead, there's still a directional pull. She instinctively knows that she needs to leave this place she's currently in. This instinct is common with accident spirits. Oftentimes, these spirits will try to leave the place, but they can't. They will try to attach to a moving person, attempting to extend beyond their boundary, similar to what this woman did in Yushen's story. But attempting to leave the boundary only leads to destabilization. This introduces the final layer, which is something you might have heard of before called Zhao Tai Sun, finding a substitute. I've discussed this in past episodes, but this is when a ghost tries to find a substitute to replace them. They believe that if they could find someone else to die in their place, then they would be able to move on. Now, Zhao Tai Sun is often misunderstood. It is not always fully intentional. It can emerge from frustration from repeated failed attempts at escaping. Over time, the spirit logic becomes, if I can't leave, someone else must take my place, which I think is somewhat at play in this situation as well, because she pretty much contributed in making Yushen crash. Thankfully, it was a very minor crash, but in stronger cases, this is where the living person dies. So, if we filter it down to what this woman really wanted, at the deepest level, it was to continue her journey home. She was trapped in the moment of her death, and ended up pulling Yushen into her loop. I don't believe she was a purely malicious spirit, but I would say she's more of a spirit that's not entirely conscious, and definitely not fully in control. She doesn't fully understand what's going on, or what she's doing. She's running on instinct, where she just knows she wants to get out of this place she's stuck in. Thank you, Hong Kong Horror family, for making it to the end. I hope you enjoyed this week's episode. Until we speak again next week, stay safe and good night.